Hello and welcome in, everybody. This is All In With Adam, episode 17. I had to look at my own little clock counter there.
You should put the episode here on the dial.
On the dial. So I have it on this little thing.
Oh, nice. Okay.
It's like an old, I think that came out of a, like it used to be at the gate for like an old arena or something, right? It's like an old school counter.
Oh.
Or like at a ticket booth. Or,
yeah, like a parking lot kind of thing where they tick like how many cars are in there. Maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Because like, I don't know, I guess counting is difficult, but you know.
Kevin Durant had his name in on that one right there. Durant action. That thing's cool, man.
Oh, it is called a Durant, yeah. It's funny, man. Well, dude, it's weird having you here because you're one of the weird friends I forget how long ago we met.
Weird friends that he forgets.
Just cut that clip out.
You're one of them weird ones that I forget about a lot.
I forget about you all the time, dude. Like he still exists.
We used to chill. You're Kevin, right?
Devon?
Devion, okay.
But no, it's weird thinking like, you know, when we met, that was so goddamn long ago. It was just
so long ago, dude.
Long time.
You were living with like, I think 11 other dudes.
Yeah, that house.
Yeah, in a shoebox. It was pretty awesome.
It was a shoebox.
It was a good time.
It was a
really good time there. I'll never forget because I don't know if it was your room, but it was for sure your drum studio that was in the back of the house that was like handyman special efficiency unit that had like that little kitchen on it where the floor was like this.
Oh,
like
dude,
the
crooked
laminate
walls
floor.
and shit. Yeah, they didn't own a level when they built that house.
No, you don't need it. But that was like my favorite part of that house. Because to me, I mean, I didn't have a drum room or anything like that. So going over there and we literally like didn't have to leave that room all day. You had a sink running water. We could just chill. You had one kit. So we were just constantly like, oh, let me show you this. Let me show you this. Let me show you this.
Yeah.
It's good times.
Didn't we meet off of, was it like a Craigslist thing?
It's exactly how we met.
How fucking weird is that, dude?
When I was in Sacramento, when I was living with Mike, I had posted on Craigslist that I was coming back here. Okay. And this is who I had studied with and whatever. And you messaged me and you're like, yeah, bro, but did you really study with Mike? You're like, I'm a featured member on his website.
Dude, no. Was this 2011, 12?
Yes.
Like Instagram didn't exist kind of thing.
Yeah,
like
that was
long ago.
Because I want to say, I moved out there in 2010 or 2011 and came back like almost 2013. So it was like somewhere in 2012 that
Jesus
happened.
Christ. I just got out of rehab.
Yep.
Remember that?
Yeah, it was crazy.
Wow.
I remember when I first went over there, it was Adenson, right?
Yeah, or off of Addison. It was News
Addison.
Ave. Yeah.
Okay. You weren't smoking or doing anything.
I was under a year out of rehab. Yeah. I didn't smoke. Yep.
Yeah. That's crazy. Now you're like a fucking...
I run a podcast talking about drugs all the
time. We the drug master.
Yeah. I think I only took off a year or so after that. A year or so. Which is good. Good thing to do for sure. But, you know, you learn what's problematic for you and what's not. And life's kind of like that. Like
sure.
You know, not everything will fuck you up in the same way that this thing did.
Did you smoke prior to rehab?
Oh, yeah.
Was alcohol and weed like the same?
No, they were never the same. Weed is always take it or leave it. Not a big deal. If I need to slow down or take a break, I can. It's not a problem. Alcohol wasn't like that, though. That was just sort of like, oh, I'm a prisoner.
That became like a physical dependency, right?
Yeah, I had a seizure. Yeah. That was the big, like, weird, like, oh, shit. Like,
was that the thing that, like, woke you up, essentially, to like, change?
One of, like, 5 things that happened. Yeah, it was just, like... There was definitely one day where I had to think back and I'm like, okay, so that happened and then this happened and then these 3 things happened. And like all of those are not okay, you know?
Yeah, absolutely not.
Pissing myself on my motorcycle was a big one.
Pissing yourself on the motorcycle.
Dude, like lost physical control. Like so drunk and so full of piss that there was nothing I could do as a grown man on a motorcycle on I-4. It's like, now I'm pissing. That's it.
Were you going like 80?
Yeah, drunk on an interstate on a motorcycle, which was
shorts or pants?
Pants for sure.
Okay, yeah, so you had some soakage. That's good.
I remember.
Yeah. We're not trying to embarrass ourselves out here. Are you kidding me?
Well, I remember as I was taking off these piss-soaked pants in my driveway, drunk. I remember thinking like, this is not okay. Like this is not a line I feel comfortable crossing. Yeah. And you know, you stack up a bunch of those things, kind of like a relationship, you know, where it's just like, wait a minute, like how much am I supposed to tolerate here or deal with. Like none of this seems okay anymore.
That's how I think about a lot of my exes too. Just like piss in your drawers, you know what I mean? Just like just throw them in the trash.
Yeah, dude.
I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
No, that is, all jokes aside, that had to be like a massive wake up call for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Wake up call is probably the right way to say it. Yeah. I did a 3-part series on this podcast about like before, during, and after rehab, sort of that whole process of like what it's like to be young and not addicted to something, and then to learn that you have a problem.
Yes.
And then go face the problem. And then what you don't realize is after doing that, you're like, you start at zero. Like, well, welcome back to the world. You fixed it. Also, now you have nothing.
Start over.
Like, start over.
Good luck.
Like, yeah.
There's no handbook on this.
None.
Yeah.
Rehab is over when your journey just begins, right? So it's like a whole different thing when you get out of it. So there was like a 3-parter on that, but it's I don't know, man. And this might be you as well, like with your dad, I would think, like anybody who has early significant trauma that they overcame seems to have like this maturity to them that's like earned because life had these hardships built in, you know, sort of like the cushy life leaves you a little vulnerable and inexperienced when you're a little soft. You haven't seen any crazy shit yet, you know?
No, man, it builds up that thickness, you know what I mean, of what you let affect you, essentially. It's like a really thick filter for life where you're like, that's really not that bad. Where other people that have been sheltered or on a shorter leash are like, my whole world is ending because I can't do whatever it is that they're trying to do, where you and I are like, no, it's not that bad.
Do you ever think about it with kids? Like, to what degree will you protect your child from the world? And to what degree do you let them get fucked up?
You know, that's a really interesting conversation to have for sure, because Taylor and I, my girlfriend, we talk about that. Well, you know my girlfriend, but these people might not. Taylor and I talk about that. It's been
a long time though, so your conversations about this get, more serious or real.
Absolutely. And we talk about like kind of what we were talking about earlier with the everyone gets a trophy kind of thing. Like that's not what we're going to be doing, because you wouldn't have all this if it was given to you all. Like you wouldn't have worked so hard for this, you know what I mean? To build it into what it is today if you were just kind of given those things.
Sure.
But as far as protection, I kind of look at it like a dog. Okay. So there is so Taylor has Duke, right? And Duke is a dickhead. He is a dick he is the smallest. I mean, he's as big as your foot.
Boston Terrier?
And he's a bully. So he just has that in him, just as Rhino does and whatnot. Like they're just aggressive, right? But there's a part of me that's like, I tell Taylor, she tries to run after him every time he chases a big dog or like nips at something that is like way bigger than him. Right. And I tell her, I'm like, let him get the shit kicked out of him. Like if our son or daughter, maybe not our daughter, but if our son was trying to like, if he was aggressive and wanted to fight somebody, I'd be like, hey, that's not cool. I'll say that enough times, but then after enough times, you're on your own. You're going to get your ass whooped, and then you're going to come back and go like, I probably won't pick on somebody that big anymore, or anybody at all, because that's ridiculous. Right. So absolutely. You can't fully protect anything from the world. You know what I mean? Yeah,
you'll fail anyway.
Oh yeah.
Right? That was a Nietzsche thing, like the good mother necessarily fails. Like you're going to figure it out no matter what you try and shelter them with. But I also think, I don't know, because Kelly and I it sounds like you guys might be too, but like very different in the classic male-female ways, where like I'm much more like let him fucking drown, he'll figure it out.
Totally.
Like throw him off the deep end.
Learn to swim.
Yeah, exactly. And she's much more of the super nurturer type. Sounds like you guys are the same dynamic.
It's a good balance though.
But I also feel like this is like the universe sort of like structured it that way anyway. Where it's like, ideally, you don't want a kid to be raised by just the disciplinarian, where it's no love, it's no empathy, it's no nurturing, it's just hard fucking rules, like do it. That would mess a kid up for sure. But then you can easily see like two dudes raised by single moms, like you can see how the nurturing side is not at all the way to go either. And I think sometimes it's not necessarily our job to be supremely balanced in how we think of it. It's to find a person that is the balance.
Totally.
Right?
Dude.
So
Absolutely.
It's like, it's the contrast that like we seem to have with our significant others is like, that's how it's supposed to be.
For sure.
Like those two influences over one kid.
It's one of the reasons I love Taylor so much is because she is the exact opposite of me.
Yeah.
I am just
different
like,
instincts.
I don't want to like sound like I've been through a ton as far as just comparing it to other people that have been through like insane things that I've never even experienced. But I was kicked around a lot more than she was. And so what attracted me to her was how, for lack of a better term, like how pure she was and how innocent and just like this little daisy flower beam of light. I'm like, oh, please like heal me. You know what I mean? Like, please show me there's another way. And so that's why I think a lot of this like evening out is kind of happening where, I don't know, I think she's made me a little bit more accepting, to say the least, like a little bit more patient. Being a teacher, you're pretty patient.
Yeah.
But after a while, there's degrees of laying the hammer down, right? Well, like how, like it's that scale of radical candor where it's like, are you that military suppressant teacher, or are you the one on the opposite side of the spectrum that's constantly the trophies for everybody? You're doing the best. You're amazing. You're the best student I have.
Yeah.
But then they go out into the real world and you're actually doing them a disservice.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So I definitely saw that in Taylor, where I was like, you can help me.
Yeah.
On top of you're hot.
Yeah, that too. I was really into that first, and then the other nice stuff was cool after. You know, I found out you were nice.
That's it. Yeah, man.
It's weird, man. I used to think. I've talked about this with Joe a bit as well, because he went through a breakup a while ago, and you know, I'm interested in how he looks at the dating world now. Like, are you looking for a wife? You know, I'm not gonna put his business all out there, but we talk about it often, and it's interesting, man. I've had to explain to him that like my view in being with Kelly. Like, there's certain things that, I don't know, it's like you think you would want your significant other to look at things the same way as you. And really, like when you're young, that's what you think is cool.
Sure.
That it's like, oh, they look at it just like me. We're just alike. We get
the
along.
Same music, same styles. Yeah,
but there's like a weird advantage to like hunting down like your contrast, you know, someone who fills in the gaps, because you can just make a long list of things that we suck at. You know, I'm not good at this, or this is unnatural for me, or I have a hard time thinking of things this way.
Sure.
And to have someone that fills in all of those gaps is it's really counterintuitive when you're young. I feel like it's something that until you experience it in that older, more mature relationship,
where you're like, oh man, I like with time, like where you are in your life, where you're open to another way of thinking, or like, wow, maybe the way that they approach this isn't as weird and as wrong as I've always thought it was. You know what I mean? You're just a little bit more open. And this sounds horrible. Sorry, all my ex-girlfriends. But Taylor, you piss pants. Taylor is actually the first girl that I've ever wanted to hang out with. Like, she's an actual friend of mine. Like, I want to chill with her, sex or not. Like, I want to hang out with this girl and have a conversation with her, where before I wasn't even open to the idea, and this is so strange because I'm like a pretty loving and sensitive dude, being raised by a single mom and all that fun stuff. But like, never would I want to bring an ex-girlfriend around my friend group. It was always two separate lives.
Yeah, that's
because
strange,
it's like I'm a certain way around you, and then I'm a very different way around my friends. And for some reason, I think it's that like correlation with where you are in your life, your age, your experiences, all that.
Yeah.
Plus meeting that person that does reflect the opposite of what you think. Yeah. It becomes attractive instead of like scary and you push it away.
Yeah.
Right? You bring it in, you welcome the adversity essentially, instead of I can't accept anything other than what I think because it's too much for my brain to handle.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I love how Jordan Peterson talks about this. He's got one phrase where he's like, let's be honest, at best, you're like half a person. Right? Like, dude, of all the types of people that there are, you're like half of one. Yeah. And maybe if you met someone who was like another half, that maybe together you could be like one cohesive fucking person, you know? And it's like, when you think about a kid and they have this entity that is just like parents, like that's it. That's how they look. Like, if they don't even separate you, that maybe together you could pitch them this like one system for how to be in the world. You're going to get some discipline, you're going to get some love, you're going to get some hard beat downs, and you're going to get some like real sweetness and affection. And maybe together, if we just throw everything at them, our differences, we'll be all right.
We'll maybe make a decent human being.
Maybe we can pop a decent kid out into the world. Yeah.
That's insane, man. Like, especially with where we are in our lives, this children talk is becoming more prevalent.
How weird is that, right?
Sure. Really, really strange.
Yeah.
Especially for the musicians watching this, you're pretty selfish as a musician, actually, right?
Yeah.
With your loved ones and whatnot, especially because Kelly doesn't play music, Taylor doesn't play music. So this isn't like, I have a buddy of mine, his name's Cameron. One of his ex-girlfriends was like an amazing bass player. They would gig together. They would legit wear like,
I wonder what that's
the same, like they would post pictures. It was really funny, actually. Unknowingly, they would dress the same like jeans and a black t-shirt to a
Okay.
gig, right? I've never ever had that.
Yeah.
And so it's like this really interesting thing where, I don't know, it's like this balance, I think, of just welcoming the unknown and the things that you've pushed away for so long, which now happens to be children, and bringing somebody in and giving away some of that time that you spend on this instrument, or time. Like, I am a person where I don't know if you're a little bit more dialed than this, but like, do you section off your creative time where you're like, I'm going to go in the studio from 1 to 3:30 today, and I'm going to knock out this, and this?
I used to try and do that, but I'm determined, at least for me, that's not how creativity works. It's very like, it shows up or it doesn't, and I'm not in control of that.
And I hate that.
Yeah.
I hate that.
It's like chasing a fox.
Dude, it's
like
catching lightning in a bottle.
Yeah.
It's like turn the camera on and just play, and hopefully you catch a clip. Like, I hated that.
Maybe.
Right?
Yeah.
And so Benny actually talks about that a lot, of like, that's not a real thing, of having to turn on inspiration.
Yeah.
And I haven't found that yet.
Yeah.
I would love to find that.
You can manifest like an environment for it, but it's still sort of up to the ether if it's showing up or not. It's still ultimately out of your hands.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. Especially like your rest from the night before, your diet, your mental space, what's going on in life,
Yeah.
all that stuff plays into that. But back to the children thing, like, you have to be, it makes sense, and I don't know why it makes sense, but it makes sense now to give up some of this time towards children, and it feels right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't know if you're experiencing the same thing, and if Kelly kind of like introduced this thought into your mind, or did you guys have this separately and go like, I think it's time to have kids?
Well, so that part of the story is actually very, very easy. We had a scare that we realized we were only calling it a scare because for the past 10, 15 years of our sexually active lives, being pregnant was very scary. That's fucking terrifying.
We're
So you
not
call
ready.
it a scare.
Yeah.
And then we just realized with this one particular scare, which, you know, it ended up, she wasn't pregnant, but we weren't scared at all. We were just kind of like, that's dope, actually.
Made you like assess the situation, because it became very real.
It became very real. And we asked ourselves, like, if this really happened, like, there's no way, like, abortion or adoption, like, none of that's on the table. Like, we're definitely keeping the kid. We own a home. We both have full-time jobs. Like, what reason would we possibly have for not having a kid? Just that we want to wait another year or two? Like, that wasn't a good enough reason. Like,
It's the fear isn't actually real. When you look at like the logistics and the financials and the time and all that stuff, it's like you create this thing that is in your mind. You're like, we're not ready for that.
Yeah.
It's
well,
weird.
you're always not ready until one day you are.
Sure.
And we got thrust into that position, and we're like, oh no, we could definitely do this. But I've also wondered, like, with women, there are more obvious biological clocks that they have built in. You know, like, there are, for example, like, they have scheduled biological events that happen in obedience to their hormones. Like, menopause is a really good example, but also, like, the desire to have a child seems to, like, happen in women much earlier than it does in men. And it also, like, I wish I knew the exact studies on this, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest that women that don't have children, like, they do encounter like depression and regret later in life, where it's like there is something about being a female that has this powerful calling, and it might not be anything more than biology. Your hormones are screaming at you.
Probably primal.
Yeah.
Like, that is like, without all this fluff that we've created around us.
Yeah.
That's really what we're here to do.
It's the most feminine thing a woman can ever do, is to have it's the most incredible thing that
100%.
your body does.
Totally.
Right?
It's fucking magic.
The bringer of fucking life here,
exactly,
dude. Like, I just came once and you got all this going.
Yeah,
It's insane.
I know, right?
It's insane.
Yeah, man.
But I do wonder, is there some sort of biological clock that goes off in men where all of a sudden this idea of settling down, owning the home, having a child, like, why is all of that stuff all of a sudden appealing? Because, like we were talking about earlier with values, like, you don't really get to control whether or not you're interested in that. It just appears to you, and all of a sudden it has this magnetism that it didn't have when you were 22, 3, 4, 5. And I wonder, is any part of that biological, or is it just more like philosophical? Like, as you begin to learn and understand more about the world, and you develop these concepts of what it is to be a human, what it is to be a man, that eventually you're going to run into this thing that most men seem to run into, which is like, oh, I want all that dad shit now, right?
I think it's like, at the most basic level, a mother wants to create, and a father wants to, a man wants to protect.
Yes.
Right? And so it's like,
Hero archetype, yeah.
instead of building up yourself Kind of like what we were talking about with being a musician and being very selfish with your time and whatnot. Something happens, and I don't know if it's biological or if it's just an awareness thing and a maturity thing where you've almost checked enough boxes in your own personal journey and your goals to where you're like, okay, this broader spectrum of giving myself up to something else and letting them thrive and helping them thrive, whatever that is, even if it's the chickens that you have outside.
Yeah.
Like, not many people would own 15 chickens or however many you have because it's a lot of freaking work. You had to give up some of your time for that, right?
Yeah.
So it's like this switch that goes off to like, it makes sense to be a protector. And that's where you start to fill your cup instead of it being like, I need to put out a massive amount of drum videos and fill my cup that way and let everyone know like this cool shit that I'm doing and essentially like share that gift and whatnot. It just switches to something that is very personal.
Yeah.
And obviously I can't explain it that well. It's something that is like the gift of nature, dude.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's weird. It just switches. You and I actually talked, I think when we both, because you're 32. 31. Okay. I'm 32. And I think when you turned 30 and I was 31,
we had a similar conversation
where it's like all of a sudden I wake up and I don't give a fuck about any of the things that I used to really care about.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean?
It's on like, you for some reason.
And it just makes sense. Like I don't have to fight it.
Yeah.
It's just what I want to do. Kind of like we were talking about with drumming earlier when people are like, man, how do you practice 6 hours a day? And you're like, did I practice 6 hours? Like, I was just
that wasn't a decision I was even
just
made.
in there. Like, was it? I don't even know what day it is. Like, this is just what I do, you know?
Yeah.
And it's just a very natural thing. It's so crazy to think about how like these phases of our lives just make sense.
Yeah.
All of a sudden.
It's strange, isn't it?
We just always seek understanding. And then all of a sudden one day you're like, I don't understand all of it, but that thing I get now. Yeah. And I'm cool with it. Let's move on.
Yeah.
It's like, shit.
Yeah.
Like, how do we do that with all of these other things that are confusing, you know?
Yeah. It's
crazy.
It's fascinating, man. That's why we were talking about this just before we were rolling, but like this concept of like values sort of manifest themselves in the world to you. And if you pay attention to how much of it you control, you'll realize it's almost none. You know, what you find valuable seems to be completely out of your control. And it's weird to I actually got scared when I first began going through this with drums, where not that I ever transitioned and hated drums, that never happened, but more so like the magnet sort of wore off in a weird way, and all of a sudden these other things, the pull was not there anymore.
The thing that is just it triggers you to practice all the time or to create, or that thing we're talking about where it's like, was I in there for 10 hours? Did I just edit for 53 hours on this last video? Like, that's insane. You know what I mean?
And it's not that like it definitely is a little scary to me that it's surprising. Like, I look at drums like I have a relationship with them and always have. It's a very old relationship, one of the oldest ones that I still have, right? Like as the entity that is music, I've got a relationship to it. And I didn't realize that can change despite whether or not I want it to. That doesn't matter. How you'd like to keep this relationship doesn't matter. And what bothers me is that if I make that like an entity, the drums, that like, could this happen with people? Right? Does that happen with like your significant other, where you're like, I don't know, for some reason, just the magnetism that I had towards this person, this friendship, this relationship, to your wife or to your girlfriend, can that just disappear?
100%.
Oh, that's scary,
People
man.
wake up after like 25 years of marriage and look at their husband or wife and just go like, I don't love you anymore,
I got nothing.
Dude. Like, I haven't loved, I'm just finding out that I haven't loved you for years.
Right?
Like, how does that work? Where even yourself, you're not even aware of it when it's happening to you, and then all of a sudden something just triggers it and puts it at the forefront of your mind, where you're like, this has got to fucking change.
But that's so scary. It makes you feel vulnerable in that way. That you're a changing and a shifting value system. Man, what if they just get fucking scrambled every 6 months? Like, ooh, that sucks. How are you going to stick with anything, you know?
It's weird. It's a really, really weird thing. And that's why it's incredibly rare to find people. It's kind of a fine line of finding people that have been married for like 40 plus years. That's really, really rare to find. Yeah. But then once you go a step further and you see, are they actually happy, or are they just from a generation where, like you and I were talking about earlier, if you wanted to make X amount of dollars or whatever, there was only so many routes, you know, 50 years ago to do that. And normally it was like the same route. You work for somebody else and you climb that ladder. Or you starve forever and try to start your own thing, and that's very rare. But you find these people that have been with each other for 40 years, and they're feeling so vulnerable from breaking that pattern that they don't even know who they are as an individual anymore. And that's scarier than staying in a relationship where they wake up every day and they know they have no connection with that person.
Yeah.
That's fucking dark.
Oh,
sorry,
super
guys.
dark. Yeah, it's really dark. Yeah.
It's
You wonder
crazy.
how many people, especially if you go back to more traditional cultural setups and marriage setups, where like how many people like willingly stayed in a miserable marriage because of culture, because of tradition.
Most of them.
Yeah, tons of
I
them.
would imagine, because
Tons of
naturally,
them.
like, we are not meant to be with one person.
Yeah,
It's kinda crazy.
Though it seems like that's a tricky statement though, because it sure seems like we do that.
We totally do that.
We do that.
Yeah. I wonder how much of that is stemmed from religion.
A good
And
chunk.
just the way that, like, this blueprint for a good, just follow this somewhat and you'll have a decent life.
A good
right?
chunk of it, a good chunk. And there was certainly periods of time where the traditional religious way to live your life was undoubtedly the best option you have, because we don't have understanding of any alternative way to live.
Sure.
This is the closest to truth that we're able to orient right now, is to look at it this way.
what makes sense.
And it was all fundamentally untrue. Wasn't really the point. The point was the healthiest, happiest, most successful people on the planet happen to be religious
Followed
right now.
that
They do
model.
this
Yeah,
because
exactly.
it's the best we got right now. Yeah, dude, my views on a lot of religious stuff have definitely changed over the last year or so, and a lot of it is. I'm curious what you think about this. Making the distinction between fundamental truth, like this actually happened, versus something that merely contains truth. So, for example, like name a fictional Disney movie. Not true. Didn't happen. Not real. But we can find truth within the story.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And so when you view religion through that lens, it really... It doesn't matter if it actually happened or not. If it contained truth, this story, this ancient story, and people first began to understand that concept through religion, like saying that it's not fundamentally true is not the right point to make.
Sure.
It really doesn't matter. One of the weirdest examples of this idea that in ancient religions, which we know are like fundamentally false, we're not saying that this stuff actually happened, but where people could have discovered truth would be the idea of sacrifice. So, for example, we have this understanding of time right now, where if we make a sacrifice today, we're bargaining with the future. We're saying, I'll give this thing up right now, or I'll endure some sort of... Yeah, we're making a trade. But how far back in human history do you have to go until that very concept was not present in human consciousness? Like, animals don't look at the world this way. They do not bargain with the future.
As far as we know.
As far as we know, there's very little evidence that they do like that. Let's say a cat or something. A cat is not planning for tomorrow. The concept of tomorrow or restraining something today for a better version of tomorrow.
Time itself
doesn't even exist to them.
Segmenting days.
So if you look at when along the line of human progression did we first have this concept that we can give up something in exchange for something better in the future, to barter with reality that way. One of the first examples you find in all cultures that we know of is sacrifice.
Yeah.
And given the way they were doing it was you kill the firstborn goat so it doesn't rain on Thursday. Like that kind of shit. I mean, it was wrong. That's not how it works.
Sure.
But conceptually, you discovered something very true, right? And so it's sort of like, it's easy to look through the barbaric lens and say, like, these were just fucking morons, like, slaughtering animals for the weather.
Sure.
Like, it doesn't make any sense. But if that was the first time, as an observer, if that was the first time that you're like, wait a minute, yo, you guys just stumbled on some big shit, huh? Then all of a sudden, like, you wouldn't call that barbaric. You would call that a brilliant revolutionary discovery in the evolution of humanity.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, you're pioneers, essentially. It's weird because a lot of that stuff happened, I don't know, thinking of this like this moment here, 1,000 years from now, a lot of the things that we think scientifically are finite, that are like, this is the way that this equation equals this number every single time, might be essentially just as bogus as Poseidon ruling the seas eventually, where people will look back and be like, are you kidding me? Like, talk to any super religious person and you ask them about Greek mythology and they would be like, that's not fucking true. Are you kidding me? But everything in their belief system is totally valid, right? No matter what it is.
Sure.
And so it's essentially like that they're just trying to figure these things out, right? So sacrificing, it's just experiments. And then through statistic probability, man, it's like, sometimes it's not going to rain on a Thursday if you sacrifice a baby goat.
Yeah.
And so that person's right.
Oh, shit.
And so through time, they're like, well, it worked that one time.
Yeah.
So let's kill all these fucking goats and maybe we won't have rain for the next like 3 months so we can plant all of our crops and get everything ready.
Yeah.
Then we'll like, you know, mate a bunch of goats and then it'll fucking rain for a month straight and we'll get these crops or whatever. It's just so much. We're pretty dumb, honestly, as a species, dude. Like, we are just ridiculously behind as far as our evolution or our spot in evolution. We are operating on really old hardware.
Yes.
Right? And so even fathoming like these answers that could be right in front of our faces, we wouldn't be able to see them because we don't have the correct lens or whatever it is to see the answer that we're looking for. So when we look in the past and we look at these people sacrificing goats or kind of like stumbling across this like almost truth, essentially.
Tiptoeing around it.
It's, like even if you're in the moment, you don't see that happening regardless. So, you know, projected 1,000 years from now, people will still be having the same conversation.
Yeah.
Maybe. If we're even here, if we don't blow the goddamn world up.
Yeah,
you know
if we're here,
which will probably happen.
Yeah.
Because we're so stupid. So out there, become a scientist.
Yeah. Man, I heard a fascinating thing the other day about how, like, to think about how revolutionary it is to even think like a scientist. Like you have, let's take a philosopher like somebody like Aristotle, like Greek reason, right? Like, which sort of ushered in like the Enlightenment period, the idea that we would be able to test things and have theories.
Being open.
Just being open to different ideas.
Just don't say like, this is it.
Yeah.
Just give it another try.
But even like Aristotle, like he did not ever once think to assemble a team of unbiased people to send them to all go run separate tests and compare the results.
Sure.
And then see what
have
is
a
the
placebo
most
group.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like how unnatural scientific thinking is really crazy, man. That is not how your brain works at all.
Sure.
You know?
You have to train yourself.
Yeah.
You have to train yourself to do these things and to be. It's so hard to walk that line of being an actual observer of the world and having an opinion. Because if you say something where you're like, man, the world's fucked up. Like, sure, it is. But through what lens? And essentially, like, to someone else, this might be the exact direction that we need to be going. To somebody else, they're like, everything's going to shit. We're done.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like, dude, I don't know. We're so far along in time that like, and everything's so intertwined that it's hard to differentiate now, right?
And the lens is incredibly important because think of it this way, like, how many facts are there in this room? Like, there's some
like definitive
like this facts. Is metal. Exactly. Okay. So this is metal, this is wood, this is brown, that's black. We could start adding up facts. But if we take that to a molecular level, there are infinite number of facts in here.
Sure.
Right? There are scratches on this table that are microscopic, but if we had the microscope and opened it up, each one of them is slightly different than the other. And all of a sudden we have this infinite list of facts that we can come up with.
Sure.
So it's like determining objective reality based on the facts around you is very hard. Like at some point you have to put a lens on, right? You got to put on a pair of glasses, or you're gonna go fucking nuts.
That old hardware, man.
Yeah.
Try to load Logic Pro onto like the first Apple computer.
Yeah,
it's just gonna be like, sorry.
Yeah,
like we don't know what that is.
It's weird, man.
Yeah, it's insane. It's crazy because like with the point that you brought up with like the wall is black and that's brown and whatnot, just like what we see on the surface level is very, very different than what it actually is. So black is the absorption of all colors, right? So that's every color. And then
we don't see pure black. Yeah.
Exactly. My buddy's older brother is a theoretical physicist, and he blew my fucking brain when I was like 11, dude.
Yeah.
He was like, there is a possibility, which we would never be able to do this because we're not accurate, accurate enough, I'm sure you could set up some sort of robot or whatnot, but even the robot would have little malfunctions. If you could actually press the same spot on this table, there's a statistical probability that your hand would go through because you would split the atoms.
Yes.
Like my finger being on this table, it's actually not touching this table. There is an air gap in between. So like we're not ever physically touching anything, right?
Oof.
So it's like,
shit.
Where do you cut it off for your sanity?
Yeah.
Because we live in such a complicated world that if you walked outside and you like looked at like the grass and like below and all the roots and shit, you're just like, oh my God, like I can't even go to the fucking store.
Yeah.
Like that's too much. I'm never going to leave my house.
It's one of the things that psychedelics do is that it unsimplifies the world, where all of a sudden you see everything as though it's the first time you've ever seen it, and everything is bursting with significance. Mm-hmm. Everything is important and significant. And then you realize in order to like make it through the fucking world, you have to simplify all sorts of stuff. Like
you got to shut it off.
Even the fucking internet and the computer. Like I can't think about the fact that there's microchips and that it's determined by the electricity which runs the power company, and there's a grid that has to.
Everybody's plugged in.
Yep. All of that has to be simplified into computer. Totally. And then I press this button and a thing happens, right? Yeah. And it's fascinating, like to what degree do you want to abstract that stuff and how often? Because you can't make it through the world. It's like being on a psychedelic trip all the time. Like you can't just stare at the molecules and the textures of things and be blown away. But also like that googly eyed, like amazing look that babies have. Yeah, that's how they see everything. They're just like, what the fuck is this? Yes. Like everything's amazing. Everything is intriguing. They're not wrong. It is amazing. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's crazy. I remember. One time, sorry mom, I took acid a handful of times, but I
20, 30, 40 times.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I was in my buddy's dad's trailer park.
Hey.
And I woke up. We never went to sleep. So the next morning I'm sitting there on his back porch and I'm like looking at my hand, and I could just, obviously I was still seeing like a little bit of like motion and whatnot. And this wasn't my first time taking acid, so I knew what to expect. I was a little bit more seasoned. Yeah. And so I'm looking at my hand and I just realized like how intricate all like the fingerprints are and the veins, like the vascularity, and like just like
it's a masterpiece.
Went way too deep in like my calluses and like where they're from and like the track record of those things and the skin building up. And then like my mom calls me and she's like, hey, how's it going? I don't remember the exact conversation we had, but I just remember getting off the phone with her and she immediately texted me. She was like, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, I'm good. And I just like, it was sinking in at that very moment how crazy complicated everything is around us, and how we literally have to shut all of that out to just get through the day. Right?
Practically you have to.
And then this idea of building on top of this crazy life that we live in to build a career, an identity, things that you're interested in, pulling from all this craziness to go like, ooh, I could spend some time on that when everything around you is pretty overwhelming. Do you think about that? You know what I mean? Like even colors. Like you could spend years on experimenting with colors and like the different hues of black. Like that's deep, but you know what I mean? Yeah. Like it's just every single thing is so fucking deep, dude. Yeah. It's absolutely insane. But looking at my palm, I was just like, I'll never understand this. And it was literally just my palm.
And you won't. Nobody does.
In my life, I'll never understand how this shit works. It's crazy.
I think this is one of the reasons people oftentimes can freak out or have panic attacks on psychedelics, because the weight of reality and how complex it is hits you sometimes. And even just there's levels of depth to having like a psychedelic trip, but like just being exposed to that world, you realize like how vulnerable you are. Like you're a pile of fucking cells, and somewhere in there you got some consciousness, but we're tossing that bitch all over the place.
That's
it's terrifying to realize how much you have to simplify just to be a human. You can't think about that stuff at all most of the time. You have to dumb this world down to like this 2D, like negative 400D version of simplicity just to make it through a fucking day, you know?
Think about like what we were talking about earlier, bringing a child in. Ugh. And then explaining the world that you're confused about to this kid and going like, it's all going to be okay. When you're like an anxious just mess. Yeah. You know what I mean? You're like, I don't know, dude. But like to this little guy or girl, you're like, it's fine. Yeah. We're safe. It's weird.
Back to the kid thing is one interesting point. Do you remember Heather? You met her once. There's a girl I dated before Kelly. I feel like you met her once. Anyway, she was a bit. She was like
this was a psychologist.
She had a psychology degree, I think. Yeah.
Where you told me that you would try to talk to her and she would like deconstruct, and you're like, I'm not a patient.
Yeah, kind of, sort of. She was like an ice queen. That was her personality, like cold and sharp, kind of.
Ice queen.
Yeah, that's a good description for her. I wish we had been friends, to be honest. She wasn't compatible with a personality type like that. But she had this colder view of kids and it may have changed. She's definitely, this was 10 years ago.
She probably has 7 kids.
She might have 7 kids. I don't know. Maybe she's Catholic or something now.
It's all
but
good.
Her view was that it was like fundamentally selfish to have kids, because it's like you're with this other person and you're like, well, I love you so much and you love me so much. Let's make like a baby us. For a world that objectively doesn't need more humans, we got enough. Right?
That is fair.
Right? And so it was like this perspective. Yeah, it was selfish to have a child. Like, who are you to think that you should be ushering consciousness into the universe because you're so fucking cool? But now, my view on that has definitely changed. But I look at it now as if you have good intentions, if you believe that you have the capacity to be a good father, a good mother, a good parent, that it's almost like a duty that you have to try and pass that along somehow to the world,
You're like injecting a better person into the shit world.
Correct. You're doing your best to do that.
With amongst the, not like saying we'll have perfect kids, but it's like, if you try your hardest and you have a decent head on your shoulders, then you are going to maybe do the world a better, a service essentially, to where it's like, hey, this could inspire greatness somewhere else.
And then, the other side of that is if you don't have kids, then the purpose of your life was, what would you say? Like your experience? That's why you're here? So you can have an experience, improve yourself, and to not pass that along to another generation in the form of being a parent.
That seems more selfish to me.
Right? That's the other argument. It's actually... You could argue it's more selfish to say, I'm just here for me, my lived experience. I'm going to be the best person I can be, and then I'm going to take that shit with me because I'm dying and not actually helping. Right?
Yeah.
It's a different way to look at it, where I never used to think of it that way, but now I do feel like an obligation. If I'm interested in self-improvement and bettering my psyche, my consciousness, my body, like taking care of this thing, then I really have this responsibility to pass that along to somebody. And if I keep it to myself, I'm kind of being a dick. Like, I owe it to someone, something.
The world needs more of that.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Since I've been home these last 2 weeks, it's been really interesting because I see, with no names being mentioned, I see a lot of people that I went to school with in high school and whatnot that now have, like, just through seeing people I haven't seen in years, and they're like, oh yeah, blah, 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 has like 2 kids now. I'm like, why?
What?
Like, the people that should not be having children, mind you, I understand this is very judgmental and it's from afar, and they could be amazing people now later in life.
Sure.
But it's the people that shouldn't be having the children are the ones that never have these thoughts. Never, ever even think about, should I do this? It's always a mistake, or essentially often. Like it kind of, catches them by surprise or whatnot. And then they go ahead and they do it anyways, which is fine. That's their own choice and whatnot. But it's like, that is the exact opposite of what we need to be putting in this world.
Sure.
Right? Is another, I hate to say it, like warm body, essentially.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, like there's a lot of people, a lot of amazing individuals that come from really shitty upbringings. And just horrible things that have happened, which then kind of, like you were saying, you weren't sheltered from the world. So it changes you into this introspective person that now you are the change. Like my mom, super abusive father.
Okay.
My mom has never been abusive towards me, right? Or my sister. And so she's broken that cycle.
Correct.
So it's almost like...
And didn't give it to you.
Exactly. Yeah. Into where I am now, like I've filtered through enough shit in my life to where now when I go and I have a child, it's going to be hopefully a little bit better planned out emotionally.
Of course.
Because I'll kind of know what to expect. Of course, within guidelines, but like the shitty things that have happened, we can work through it because I've had to do that myself.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and also your mom, none of our parents, it wasn't perfect. There were definitely some things that she probably did 100%. Growing up where you're like, ooh, I learned from that. And so whatever bad qualities that she may have still had from her lineage or whatever, because everybody has those.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you have an opportunity to assess some of those things and go, well, that's going to stop with me. And some bullshit that we have going on will still pass along, and our kids will be able to.
You can't stop that, right?
And it's like when you say, I don't want to have a kid, I don't want to participate in that. To me, it's sort of like, it's a selfish way of saying, I don't want to participate in the improvement of the species. I don't want to participate in like the betterment of consciousness, the betterment of our understanding of people, right? Like, don't you want to play a role?
Sure.
In
if you sway it in a way. Yeah, sure.
And I don't think that's any different than if you adopted a kid, or if you said, well, I do want to play that role, but it doesn't mean I have to be a father or a mother, that I want to make the world better by doing other things. Like, I think you can still find a valid way to do that in some other way.
Look at you with like Rhino.
Yeah.
A pit has like the worst stereotype.
Yeah.
But he's like the sweetest little bear. You know what I mean? He's a fucking beast.
Yeah.
But like he's sweet. And so you have essentially broken that cycle. So if I hated pit bulls and I came over here and I met Rhino, I'd be like, hey, maybe they're not so bad.
Yeah.
You never know. People do that, unfortunately, with children all the time.
Yeah.
Where they bring them in and they're like, hey, you know, you try to shape them a certain way. But this is even a little bit more interesting. How much influence do you think a parent actually has over the chemical makeup of their child? Because I know what I would imagine in my mind, cool people in my life, they have kids that are fucking nightmares. Absolute nightmares. And they are like good people, good parents. Like, they're not yelling at their kids, no cursing, they limit screen time, all that stuff. But just like the chemical makeup of this demon child, you can't really change.
You can't change it.
You know what I mean?
So this steps us into this weird territory. I've yet to discuss this on this podcast.
Here we go.
I'm glad that you and I will do this together, because it's overwhelming for me to do alone. But you familiar with Sam Harris?
Yeah.
So he's got one of the most
longest podcasts.
Yeah, the long ass podcast for sure. And I don't agree.
It's incredible. It's just dense.
Yeah. And I don't agree with everything that all of his conclusions necessarily. Sure. Doesn't mean I'm capable of sitting down and debating the guy necessarily, but there are things that strike me as like, that's not how it feels to me. But one of the most like rock solid arguments that he has, it is really hard to get around, is that we do not have free will. Okay. That you are in control of virtually nothing. And so the way he describes it is like the origin of thought is something you can't pin down. So I'll steal one of his analogies. Think of a movie right now. Just think of any movie that comes to mind. And so in your mind, there's this cycle of movies. Maybe 5 or 10 came through. And you might say, well, I thought of this one because I saw it on TV the other day. And I thought of this one because me and Taylor went to the movie theater and saw that one. So that you can determine why those thoughts might have appeared. But I bet you didn't think of The Wizard of Oz. That wasn't one of them that came up.
It didn't.
But you know that movie. But in that moment, you did not have access to it. So you don't even have access to the whole filing cabinet here.
For sure.
At any given time, it's unreachable to you. And if I were to ask, what level of control did you have over which movies popped into your mind? The truthful answer is none. You controlled none of those thoughts as they appeared to you.
Sure.
And when you think about it that way, don't all thoughts work that way? It's like they float up from nothing. It's like they don't belong to you. And there's a level of like manipulation that we like to think we have over our thoughts. But his argument is that when you try to pin down, well, where exactly did I begin controlling this thought? Even the thoughts that you have about the thoughts that appeared, they appeared the same way. They all just kind of float from somewhere.
They're being handed to you. You're not like pulling the coals out of
Correct.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
So his conclusion is that you are an observer.
100%.
You're a consciousness that observes thoughts as they occur to you.
From the self.
From
whatever that is.
Yeah.
Whatever you label that as a person.
Correct.
Yeah.
But it's weird because if we're all merely observers of our own consciousness without free will to control it, then you're asking like, could we change a kid, based on their environment? Like the answer there would be not really. No, not
That's
really.
Who they are at their core.
Yeah, that's who they are.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. Like, even as you asked me what movie, if I were to choose a movie, whatever, there was about maybe like 5. I don't know why I thought of Braveheart first, right? And this is just me being like speaking out loud and vulnerable, so I have no idea how this is going to pan out.
Sure.
But it's just always really interesting to me, like the micro timings, basically, that it's just so quick where your personality your inward personality plus being an observer of the self. Like I do this all the time when I'm playing drums, when I'm practicing something new or have an idea, I'm not playing, I'm watching myself. I'm standing like the teacher would over my shoulder, right? And I'm like looking at myself. So as you asked me these movie ideas, a bunch of movies came to mind, but then my personality came in and what would be cooler to talk about. And it was, it all happened in a millisecond. And I'm just like, what can I talk about a lot? What do I know really well? What's fresh in my mind? Mm-hmm. And so it was like this list came up, but then like in a millisecond, this golden movie idea came up that I was like, oh, I'll talk about this. Yeah. And so it's like where in that is free choice and free will, essentially. Correct. Where it's like, okay, this list of choices popped up. Yeah. I didn't choose any of those. Yeah. It was just like this other thing where my personality came in, the moment, where we are in time, what we're talking about. And you understanding we're on camera, like all these weird things that happen, right?
I was going to say you had all these parameters. Like I know we're on camera and I know it should be interesting.
And I know so fast.
Yes. Yeah. And but you didn't even choose the parameters.
No.
Right? So and that's the thing.
It's just this is the way it is.
Yes. Yeah. And you try to pin down at what point did you control any of that?
Sure.
And it's like you never can. Anytime you do one of these thought experiments with like, what did my brain do? Mm-hmm. And you try to say, well, here's where I made the decision. Good one.
Yeah, like, exactly.
You really can't pin it down ever.
I was going to say, so whatever the movie is that you choose, is there at any point, this is the question, do you think there's any point in that process where you actually do make a definitive choice? Because to stop analyzing is a choice, right?
Yes.
But do we have control over that? Because I've experienced analysis paralysis for hours, days, sometimes weeks over certain ideas that I'm working on or writing or whatever it is. And in these moments, it's like sometimes it feels super definitive and comforting to be definitive and stop that stream of consciousness and go like, this is the idea. I feel good about that. Where do we draw the line of like, I chose that, or I'm just so done with thinking about this thing that I just want to get it over with. I don't even care as much as I did when we originally started thinking about this thing.
Well, a choice originates from a thought. Mm-hmm. You had the thought, and the thought was, let me make a choice. Now, where did that thought originate? That's the thing. It's like, well,
the outside world. Because I wasn't even thinking about movies or choosing one. And then you put that into my brain where now there is this definitive parameter.
Yeah.
That's like immediately set up, right?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. It's a frustrating one because I think everybody has that universal reaction to be defensive when you say that you don't have agency to make any choice. You're an observer of life floating through and you don't really make decisions. Mm-hmm. Everybody hates that at first.
I love that. It takes a lot of pressure.
Yeah, that's Sam Harris's argument. Life's easier.
Life isn't happening to you; it's happening for you, kind of thing. Where it's like, it's gonna happen whether we lock ourselves in the studio or not. Like tomorrow will come. We won't see the sun come up because there's no windows. It's still the same day to us. But life fucking rolls on. You know what I mean? So it's this really interesting. I don't even know like where you just get like fed up with it. Yeah. Right? You just kind of fed up with thinking about something and just, I don't know, like to me it's easier. It's way easier just to be like, dude, this isn't happening directly to me. This is just the world that we live in. Yeah. And this is just me opening my eyes and being aware enough to go like, these things are happening.
Yeah.
That's it. Not for this or to this person or to me. That's kind of where it gets into, at least for me personally, a little bit selfish. Okay. Where it's like, we're so insignificant in this world that we would love to think that like we're not, revolving around, or the earth isn't the center of the universe kind of thing, right? We've proven that, whatever. The earth is not flat. It's basically like that. It just seems so bogus to me that we're so insignificant and small that nothing is happening to us. We are the bacteria here, essentially. Sure. And it's just the world that's happening around us. Sure. And you observe it and you go, yeah, that's happening. Or you take that personally. Correct. Kind of, right? That's the kind of line that I'm trying to like differentiate here is like, you either make it personal or you don't.
Sure. And you're on a ride. That's people don't like to accept it that way. But experience. Life happens for you. Reality's here for you in a way. But that's one of the things that makes consciousness so goddamn special is that the fact that you're conscious is what makes all of that true.
Sure.
Right? That you participate in reality in a certain way. And the thing is, we've yet to discover consciousness off of this planet. So some of those like selfish inherent viewpoints that it feels like everything should be revolving around us, in a weird way, what is reality in the absence of consciousness? Right? Like what matters now?
Sure.
Right? Because strong argument, nothing. Well, who fucking cares? If there's no one to experience reality, then the validity of reality seems to disappear with it. Like, well, who fucking... There's no one to care.
Yeah.
So who cares is like, well, the answer is no one, and so none of this actually matters. But the unique element of consciousness itself makes you feel like that selfish view that it is all about us, or it's all about consciousness, isn't that what makes it matter at all?
Sure.
The fact that we're even here to experience it, because in the absence of consciousness, like, well, now it definitely doesn't fucking matter, right?
Do you think it's consciousness, or do you think it is the skill of a memory bank? Because if we're not going to remember anything, like reality to me, this is just something fun to talk about.
Okay.
Reality to me lives in your memory bank. Because if you don't remember, if you had the ability to not remember anything, then there would be no personal attacks. There would be nothing to compare it to, as opposed to a good situation, a bad situation, right?
You'd be like that baby or on the acid trip where everything is just new all the time.
It's just awesome. Yeah. And then you're just soaking it in, constantly soaking it in. So you would literally live this like, man, this is an incredible place all the time. But, you know, as a human being, you have those lulls, right? I forget what I was watching the other day. It was this really interesting thing where why humans are so tortured is because we, as we know it, we are one of the only species that can project different outcomes without it actually happening. So we can go like, all right, well, we're in this studio. I could see myself going over there and ripping the Mac off the desk and throwing it against the wall. Like that could be reality, or like sitting down and playing a beat or whatever. You know what I mean?
Imagine potential.
And you could go like, that's not cool. I'm not going to do that. And then you X that out, right?
Yeah.
Or, okay, I'll sit down and play a beat, whatever it is. That is like where we get lost in reality and like opinion, essentially, where you create something that essentially hasn't happened. That's where anxiety lives, right? The fear of the unknown and of something that actually hasn't even happened yet. It's just so crazy. So it like coincides with almost like seeing the future.
Yes.
But also having this memory bank of the past.
Correct.
And you're like constantly swaying between like, where could this go and where have I been?
Yes.
And then you differentiate like, I know this is comfortable to me. This is uncomfortable to me, right? I fall with it. This is what I do as a person because this is who I am, all based off of memory. Yeah. Just like that moment in the morning we were talking about where you wake up and every problem from the day before, you have to re-download that. Every human being ever gets up and is like, oh, wow, I'm awake. And then you realize I'm in my room and are my lights on? Oh, shit, I left the AC on all night.
You download.
Okay, cool. And then you're like, wait, I feel like I'm super fat and I'm really slow and I wish I was taller and I wish I had this girl or this, whatever it is. Like you download all these things immediately. And the memories. And you carry that fucking weight with you all day. For the rest of your life. And none of it's real. It's all self-inflicted. I mean, it's real. Sure. But it's like you remind yourself of that. Yeah. You have the opportunity. You see these things at like TJ Maxx all the time. Little like, make every day a new day. Right? Yeah. It's like what my mom's house is.
Live, laugh, love.
It's like, now, no opportunity wasted. Like that kind of thing. You know what I mean? That's it. Yeah. So it's just this really interesting balancing act, I think, of where we can kind of see, we can go through the statistics and the probability of us like going these certain directions, but also basing it off of where we have been. Yeah. And that's like where reality lives and self-worth comes from. Like all these weird things that you like tell yourself every day.
Yeah. Well, two interesting things with the memory. Like, I mean, consciousness is definitely, like, memory plays a big role, but animals do remember things too, right? Like, so it's not exclusive to us. It's the future thing is definitely more of like a human consciousness deal.
We're the only the only species that we know that can barter
with
that, right?
Barter with the future in a way, right? But
see things without it happening.
Sure. Yeah, imagine potential and then know that we can alter reality to bring that into actuality. We're fucking weird. But a fascinating way to think about this time thing, that forward and back and present are the only three lenses that we have to look through, really. But one is that depression and anxiety, two like highly neurotic emotional states, like just very negative emotional states. Anxiety is always pertaining to the future, and depression is always pertaining to the past.
Absolutely.
Isn't that fucking fascinating? That the two worst states you can find yourself in are either because you're scared of what has already happened or you're scared of what's going to happen.
It's never now.
Yeah. Now it's probably fine.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're in a panic state, right?
It's so strange.
Isn't it weird?
Yeah, I know when I'm the most anxious is because I am so detached from the present.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
You're not. You're either looking back or forward.
100%. Normally it's forward.
Yeah.
Because it's like obviously the fear of the unknown as human beings. That's like one of the biggest things for all of us is like that's that fear of I don't really know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is everything.
Totally.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a wonder why we're not anxious perpetually all the time. It's pretty incredible that we find moments to not be that way. You know, if you're scared of the unknown, well, like, good luck, bro. You just cruising through the unknown forever.
That's it. That's literally what we do. Every day is the unknown. What's crazy is that we eliminate choices off of something that hasn't even happened or even is real, essentially, when we're projecting into the future. Like this podcast, for example. You could have easily been like, oh, man, but I've been a drummer for, over a decade, and that's what I built my career off of. My persona, everything is built around drumming and education. You could have squashed this idea before it even happened. Yeah. But if you let it happen, you really don't know where the fuck it's going to go. Yeah. Which is so crazy. So like even us projecting ourselves in the future, no matter how many pathways that is, all of them are valid.
Yes.
Right?
All of them are valid.
All of them could be valid. They could be positive things. It doesn't have to be this negative thing. But I wonder where, speaking of like free will and choice, how do we eliminate things that we are constructing in our brains, right? There's nothing to go off of except this weird feeling of like, that doesn't seem right.
Oh, okay. I see
what I mean?
I see what you're getting. Yeah.
You're creating this false reality to put yourself in this position in the future to go like, should I go that way? Nah, I don't like that.
You're imagining potential. No, you're saying, how do we decide if you chase that or not?
And then some things feel right. And that's where like inspiration and creativity come in. And you're like, no, this is what I'm going to be doing. Yeah. Right? This just feels good. Yeah. It's so crazy.
It's a heavy one, dude. Yeah.
I know. That's a whole other podcast.
No, it totally is. It totally is. Because you're talking about, it's weird. The very concept of potential is just so fascinating. Like, I love thinking about like kids with potential, because like you are nothing but potential, that you could be anything. You could be anything.
You literally could.
But the downside is you are currently nothing, right? If you're full of potential, it means then you're nothing is what you are.
Yeah,
right?
You haven't used any of it yet. You're full of it.
Exactly. Yeah. It's fascinating. Also, I like thinking about potential, whether it's like the quality that a person can possess or it's like the more abstract view of reality, like what could reality be, like just assessing the future, right? It's weird that potential is something you actively lose with time. It's very directly related to your lifespan, because when you're young, you're full of potential purely because you're young.
Your age.
But it decreases as you get closer to the day that you die. Like an 80-year-old's potential is almost gone.
Sure.
So it's relative like to how long you live when you say potential, It's weird. It's sort of like it's draining from us every day.
Yeah, that's
we're losing it.
Because that's not, to me, that's not true. That's a self-inflicted, not maybe self, that's a world, an outside world inflicted thing. That's someone else saying like, you're 80, you can't be doing a lot of physical, there's limitations there, right?
Well, but okay, so when we say that you're looking at what potential is, you're looking into the future.
Yes.
So it is tied to time.
Yeah, how much you have left.
How much you have
essentially.
Exactly.
And how much you can accomplish within that given amount of time.
Correct.
Yeah.
So it doesn't disappear with age. That's what I'm saying. Like it sounds mean, certainly, to say an 80-year-old
absolutely right.
has less potential, and that is mean. You don't say that to an 80-year-old. Like, Grandma, you're running low.
You ain't got much left, G. Okay.
But it's weird because it makes you value your time alive in somewhat of a different way for me, because to think I'm, we're losing vitality, that's for sure.
Every day.
We're losing, testosterone, a bunch of things that we're actively losing.
Sure.
But man, to think potential is draining from you. Oh, that stings.
That
what could be is limited now.
That gives me anxiety. Yeah. Where it's just like,
it's future.
Oh my God.
Related to future.
Yeah, you feel like you're under this pressure to create yourself, your life, your pathway, whatever that is. But like, I don't know, man. A lot of these emotions, I have always told myself that it's not, yes, it's real because I'm feeling it, but where that comes from is not real, essentially, because you can change it. Things that are scary today might not be very scary. They might become your favorite thing once you do it. And you're like, oh shit, this is fucking cool.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like trying to look at it once again, just being an observer instead of it's like, oh, this is, happening to me. Oh, just my luck. With my luck, I'll fucking do this and this. It's just like, okay.
Yeah.
Like I don't know. It makes it less personal. It makes it a little bit more scientific to just go like, all right, well, none of this fear, this anxiety, and all of these things aren't actually real. Yes, my time on this earth is totally limited and it decreases every day.
Yeah.
But that idea of, thinking of people that hit their stride in their 60s, right? So it's like, did they have all this potential from, being born up until 60, 65? And now all of a sudden they have like this unlimited potential from 65 till death? Did they find some sort of
tapped
inspiration?
into it late or something?
Yeah, like it's a late bloomer for potential.
Yeah.
Some people don't believe these things, especially like within themselves, until, I don't know, later in life. Some people, they get the confidence earlier in life. There are some people that become doctors in their 60s and they're like these pivotal characters in time that write some like really incredible books, or they have like this amazing research that opens up a lot of things for younger generations, older generations, whatever it is. It's just interesting to think about that, and it's our perception, right?
Yeah.
Other than our time is limited because we age. We only have a certain amount of time. We don't live forever, right?
Well, it's also tricky because to say somebody has reached their full potential, like you never really have the authority to say that, because that person who hit their stride in their 60s, well, clearly they left some potential on the table because they could have done that 20 years earlier, right? Lazy fuck. But but also, if you had a kid that made the most of every opportunity, who are you to say that they actually made the most of every opportunity? Because they could probably tell you, when I was 15, I definitely cut a couple classes and maybe I did this and this, and if I only had known this, and right? So like
most people say that.
Yeah.
If I would have only known what I know now.
Of course. Almost everybody ends up saying that. So like, yeah, to maximize or to live up to your full potential is impossible. But the point is that that's where you set your aim. And in the last episode of this podcast, I did this somewhat of like a breakdown of like, this to me is the metaphor of Christianity with Jesus Christ. Because he was born a man, right? Normal dude.
He was like the first David Blaine.
Pretty much. Yeah. But you know what I'm saying? He was like the story, born a man, normal dude, and he lived with all of the temptations that you and I do, but he never fucked up. He lived to his full potential, which is to live a perfect life. He was the ideal. And only by accepting this guy into your heart spiritually, that's the only way you would have access to this greater good up in the sky, to God, right? But that story, if we remove the fundamentalist part that this dude was like murdered on a cross and he was the son of
all
God,
the horrible things. Yeah.
The idea is that if you want to have access to the greatest good that there is in the universe, the best thing you could ever imagine, your best shot at doing that is to attempt to live up to your full potential.
Sure.
To aim yourself at whatever the ideal version of you is. And are you going to do that? Fuck no. You won't even know if you got close or not, because who's to say what your full potential is? But Christ represents the aim. You should aim to be
this way.
To be this way. Because to be Christ-like is to basically make all the right decisions all the time and to always maximize your potential, to be the best that you can be. And that is your ticket to accessing the highest good that there is, which would be God. Which is why your ticket to get into heaven, according to Christians, is to accept Christ into your heart. But you could reframe that and say, hey, man, your ticket to the highest good that there is on this planet, the best shot you have is to maximize your potential and aim at the ideal version of you. Sure. That's how you get whatever the fuck is out there. That's it. And so to me, that's like it's another example of like ancient religions encountering true things, where it's like, man, that might not have been the worst way to look at it in 600 AD. That probably was, you figured out more than most people have.
At night.
Yeah, exactly.
Gave you some answers.
It might have given you an objectively better life than you would have had otherwise. Just the concept of there's something good out there that I'm not worthy of.
Sure.
And man, let me try my best to like orient myself to aim towards that fucking thing. That is the concept of Christ and God.
Sure.
You know? And yeah, it's a lot of validity in that, man.
That's interesting. Like, just from listening to you say that stuff, do you think that potential is measured off of someone's perception of you? Because like as a person, you could be like, dude, I'm super content. Like this is my potential, right?
Yeah.
Because there are artists that die well, just to bring it into like art essentially. There are like, look at Picasso. Mm-hmm. He was, I'm pretty sure, I might have my facts mixed up, but he was like dirt poor until he died.
Yeah.
And then as soon as he died, not as soon as he died, but years later, that's when people like realized his genius and all of these things. So like these late bloomers for potential, let's say that, if you're hitting your stride in your 60s, do you think that's because you're so progressive that the world isn't ready for you until that point in time?
Yeah.
Because most of these people, like any band or any like philosopher or anyone, they've been speaking about these things for years and years and years and years.
Yeah.
And especially with musicians, it's normally about like a 10-year stint where you're just like kicked. Right, you're like doing the shitty bars. You have no fucking gigs.
Underappreciated,
and
underpaid.
Then, once you're in there for like a decade, you find this band, right? And you're like, this band's amazing. How I've never heard about them. And you realize like, oh shit, these guys already have like 12 fucking albums that they've written.
Yeah.
Like, how have I not heard about them until now? Well, it's because now the world, or whatever it is receptive to their potential.
Sure.
Right.
Sure. I think it's an issue of authority that the person who has the most authority to say if they reach their potential or not is the person themselves, right? Like if I asked you, have you reached your maximum potential? Like your answer is more valid than mine. I think just inherently it is.
You're like, yeah, you're capped out.
Yeah, but yeah, you capped out, bro.
You ain't going much further, bro.
I took a look, bro. I think you there.
Yeah,
so,
this is the top, so just ride it out.
But in reality, it's to swap out the word potential for, or rather maximizing your potential, to swap that out for something like, have you lived a perfect life? Have you achieved enlightenment? Have you made it? I really think it's a lot like the thing, like, could you live like Jesus? Like the honest answer is no. And you don't get to know. I think you have more authority to make a claim over your own fulfillment of potential than anyone else might. Sure. But I also think that you don't know either. It's really an unknowable kind of thing.
I feel like that answer would always be no. If you were going to ask someone that
it should always be no,
and you're like, dude, this is it? And you're like, fuck, I hope not.
I hope
not.
I
mean, like, this can't be it, right? Because there's a lot of life left.
It's weird, like the purpose seems to be the journey, right? Which is a metaphor.
Absolutely. You've heard that forever, right?
Yeah.
It's not about the end. It's the journey. It's the trip there, right? Which is so true, because how many times have you got the thing you're shooting for? And then you recalibrate. Then that just becomes part of the journey. It's no longer like we're at the end. It's just it's a rung in the ladder, essentially, where you're like, okay, cool, now we're here.
Yeah.
This isn't as big as I imagined it would be. Let's keep pushing, right?
Yeah.
It's weird how that self-perception kind of, I don't know, drives you to push.
Yeah.
Or go like, this is good enough.
Well, I love how Sam Harris talks about this, where, there's a whole Buddhist philosophy that life is suffering, which we all pretty much agree on. I mean, you're all going to die. That's
sure.
So suffering's on the way if you're not in it now. But a reinterpretation of that is that it's like unhappiness is kind of perpetual. So I'll steal a couple of the Sam Harris analogies. Like if you had the taste of ice cream in your mouth, that's good. You like that. You get dopamine. It feels, reward systems kick on. It's great. But if you stayed in that state and you couldn't untaste the ice cream, how long until you're begging for anything else? Ooh. Right? Or another one is get real comfortable in this chair. I mean, like perfectly comfortable. It's just, I'm good. Everything's feeling great. Now stay still. How many hours until you're begging?
I'm already uncomfortable.
You're begging. I'm
like, my
horrible,
fucking
dude.
back hurts.
It's wrecked.
Shit.
But like even these like blissful states are innately temporary.
Sure.
Physical or experiential. Like you will beg to get into a different state eventually. And you hear this examples of like Olympians who get on the on the stage with their first gold medal, and like how many weeks until it's like it has to be on to the next thing. It's like the pursuit of a goal is mandatory.
Sure.
And it's, you'll encounter happiness along the way, but it's not truly a destination, because if it is, it's just a pit stop.
That's
like we
it.
can't really camp in Happyville. There's nowhere to set up fucking camp. As soon as you set up camp, it's like, this place sucks. Let's get out of here, bro.
Yeah, I'm bored.
I'm tasting ice cream and my back hurts. Let's fucking go, dude. Like we gotta, it's always over there. It's always over there. And it's so strange that's like built into the structure of reality. Your perpetual unhappiness and the progression towards a goal is completely inescapable.
Sure.
It's weird, man.
Do you think that's, I'm sure it is, but do you think that's essentially primal, to where like at our, base level DNA, we learn to become nomadic, and then we eventually want to expand and grow and hunt over there. And then we go over there and we see how cool that is. And we look back and it's the grass is greener on the other side kind of thing, right? And so once you reach that milestone, once you've essentially planted all your crops and you have your houses built and all that stuff, that feels good for a while, but there is a time limit on that stuff, to where you reach this end goal and you live in it like long enough essentially to where now you're basically starting over. Right? Now that becomes the starting line, essentially, depending on how you're looking at this, because I know, just speaking personally, like my end goal has never been the end goal once I get there. And I can't see the next rung in the ladder until I reach that next goal, basically, or that current goal. Right. Yeah. And so it's like, is it a human condition where it's always, we're pushing it away because that's how we're built. That's what we just decide to do. And that's how we fill our time without all like this stuff to kind of interact with and entertain us. Whether none of this was here and we were just chilling with your chickens and your goats, we'd probably be like, maybe we'll add another little compartment onto that chicken coop. Like, we're just like, okay, like how do we do things with our hands? It's like, you know what I mean? It's that weird.
Yeah. Well, the primal touch is an interesting one, because my first thought is like survival. But at a certain point, when all of your needs are met, if it was just survival, your evolution would stop. It would be like, we're good. We can survive here. All needs are fulfilled and satisfied. But we have these reward systems that seem to be goal oriented. Like dopamine specifically is tied into aiming and progressing towards a goal. It's not the goal itself. It's not about you getting it. It's the aim and the drive towards it. That's dopaminergic stuff. Yeah. So it's like our biology is, yes, heavily geared towards survival, but it's also geared towards thriving.
Yes.
Right? Like biologically, our into all of our systems, physiological, like all of them want us to improve, enhance, to better, to thrive in some sort of way. So it's weird, man. I don't know where that comes from, or if you can pin that exclusively down to biology and evolution. Something about that feels a touch mystical to me.
Absolutely.
Because evolution doesn't know where we're going. It just happens. Right? But and
it happens based off of the choices that we make, because then we evolve into whatever that next step is, because as a species, you make these choices over and over and over again, and you develop that hard shell as an animal, or you lose your hard shell or whatever it is because you don't need it anymore, right? Yeah. It's interesting, like thinking of just being a nomad and, essentially getting your crop set up and your houses and all that stuff. When you're physically done, do you think it becomes a mental elevation? Even if it doesn't become like a physical, we're moving over here, we're building more, we're doing this. I feel like it might go it might go inverted essentially, where you start to try to build your mental makeup. So it's not about innovating and setting up, like once your primal needs are taken care of and you're comfortable.
Food security,
even in
all
like
that,
these Brazilian tribes, thank you. Yeah. Ignorant. It's a Brazilian tribe essentially that is like so cut off from society and all these things. They have everything that they need, but spiritually they're very elevated. We don't understand their religions and whatnot, but like as far as what they do to push to the next level becomes inward and mental, right? So it's like this weird evolution of when the physical stops, where do you go when these questions are too much, or you're not built off like with what we're building today? People might just keep building physically, and we just dumb ourselves down because it's too much.
Well, this is a fascinating thing I've heard about with like ancient Egyptians, like Mayas and Incas, and they were clearly advanced in some very different sort of ways, right? Like there's a lot of theories that they must have known how to do some sort of calculus just to do crop circles.
Sure.
Because they're not visible until you're like...
Well, aliens.
Well, aliens, clearly, bro. You know, or that...
Signs.
That like technology and let's just call it like existential wisdom, right? Like are these two separate categories, and they may have been technologically not super advanced compared to us now.
Sure.
But what other areas of consciousness may they have been very, very, very deep within? Things that we don't understand at all. Like you're saying, you know, once your needs are met, could it turn inward? And you would begin to build certain, I don't know, philosophical
mental innovations.
Mental innovations.
You're unlocking doors, and you're building on these ideas that you've never really taken the time to sit down and really get after.
Correct. And I wonder if we ran this human experiment multiple times over, you know, tech was always going to end up here, I think.
Sure.
That sort of, we can already see where it's going. You can imagine AI and simulation, and like it's easy to look forward and see what that's going to be. But that aside, when we think philosophical existential wisdom, you know, like could that have gone another direction where we think about human consciousness, we perceive it to be something very different than we do now? And is it possible that other cultures have a perspective of consciousness that is closer to truth than what we even have now? And I'll give you one weird example. There was a guy, this podcast I listened to a while ago, and he went to this very remote tribe in the Amazon somewhere. And he showed him a picture of New York City and said, hey man, do you ever think about going to a place like this? And he said, people jump off those buildings, right? And he's like, yeah. He's like, no, I don't want to go to that place. Like that was his perception of New York City. Like the place where people jump off. People kill themselves.
They hate that place.
That's all I need to know about that place to tell you I never want to go there.
Wow.
Anything else is irrelevant to me.
Sure.
People take their lives there. Why would I fucking go to that place? You know? And it's sort of like, wow, that's a really fascinating, abstracted view of consciousness itself. Like, why would I take my being to this place where people don't want to be? They literally don't want to exist here. And that's so foreign to us in this place where we are, that like you mentioning a fucking cell phone is like, what are you but y'all want to die. Like, what are you talking about, bro? Why would I fucking go out there? You know?
I don't want to die.
And you wonder if people have stumbled across these existential views of reality at different points in history where we just aren't there, you know, or we lost it. Cultures and civilizations, like on a sociological level, we lost perspectives because this culture died and they understood something that we're still struggling to figure out now. You know?
Man. It becomes probably, speaking from experience, it becomes annoying to think about these things. Right?
Very. Yeah, dude.
It's like,
I hate this podcast.
I could literally, this podcast sucks. I could literally go the rest of my life without having the religion conversation again. I don't fucking care.
Sure.
I don't. I really don't. I'd rather talk to that corner over there. Like, I will have a more intuitive conversation with that corner than I would talking about religion, because it's just like this go around thing. So after, give that, 100, 200, 300 years, people are like, yeah, we don't talk about religion anymore.
Sure.
Why? Right? Because there's a lot of like moral things that come from that, a lot of positive, like the makeup, essentially the blueprint for living a good life. But then all of the other horrible things that's done. Essentially, just like New York City and people jumping off buildings, you're talking, if you showed somebody that has like no religious makeup at all, you showed them like what religion has done on the negative side. They'd be like, why would we ever entertain that?
Yeah.
That's confusing.
Yeah.
And it's a waste of time.
I think one of the reasons, like this happens in politics a lot too, but that idea of unlimited facts, right? That you go down to the molecular level, there's more facts than you could ever handle. This is where like, if you're arguing about something like religion, or you're arguing about politics, or these very controversial double-edged swords, there's two sides to it all the time. If you're talking about America, like worst country in the world or greatest country in the world, well, like there's an unlimited number of facts that support both sides of the argument at all times. And depending on which filter we have on, I could pitch an argument to you that religion is like the most important thing that ever happened to humanity. Or I can hop on the other side and be like, you see this barbaric, fucking horrible, destructive thing? And both are simultaneously true.
Totally.
It's it becomes overwhelming where you do get to a point where you're just like, God damn, we just not talk about
totally, dude. Anymore. It's kind of like, religion in the old days essentially was just a way to come up with an answer to put something to rest, essentially, right?
Sure. To solve a problem, right?
Exactly, right? Like Poseidon rules the seas. Like, no, that's actually the moon.
Yeah.
It's like, that's how that shit works. It's gravity pulling on the earth. And it's just interesting that as we get further along in time, things become a little less valid. when before people were killing and just murdering people over these ideas. Yeah. And now it's like, yeah, maybe we weren't right. My bad. You know what I mean?
So here's the, let's go big picture philosophy with this one. So religion was like the way everybody looked at the world for a very, very long time.
Science.
Correct. It was the closest thing we had. Yeah. But then we found real science. You have the Enlightenment period. And progressively, for thousands of years, well, at least hundreds if you're counting modern science, religion has to concede ground to science. Sure. Always. It fucking loses until Christianity has retreated into this like metaphorical thing now, where I think what's going to happen.
Faith.
It's
the blanket of faith. It's
We're
just
not saying it
do you
really
believe
happened,
it or not, bro? Like, we have no fucking proof for you. But are you in or no?
Correct. Yeah. And I think that Christianity is going to retreat to the point where even Christ on the cross is a metaphor. I already believe it. But I think that's where mainstream Christianity is going, where all Christians will be metaphorical Christians, right? But if you run that experiment through to the point where it's all science, right? It ultimately tramples religion. I think what it's trampling on is all perceptions that there is something divine about humanity. Because if it comes down to chemical soup, and that's it, there is no mysticism, there is nothing divine about us. We have quantified consciousness, like it's all science, everything. So science tramples religion, it's gone. There are some gaps that I don't know how we fill, like, for example, like the concept of natural law, that you have a nature to you that we don't fully understand. If we quantify it, then we can alter it in some way. And at what point do we infringe upon humanity itself? Where what we are, what makes us what we are, well, we figured that out, and it's ones and zeros now.
We're done with that.
Correct. So it's like, it feels like an abandonment.
We don't think about that anymore.
Yeah, it's like an abandonment of humanity. And just for the sake that we understand what it is now, so we were able to fuck with it in a certain way.
We check that box.
Correct.
Yeah, and we just manipulate it now.
Correct. And to me, this is the biggest brained picture of the two ways to look at the world, whether it's Republican or Democrat, whether it is religious or non-religious or scientific. That you can put it in these two categories. There's a constrained version of the world, meaning there are limits to what we can or what we should do. That science will run into these walls, into these questions of consciousness, and we're not supposed to even go past it. Like there's this mystical element that we're never going to figure out.
We just can't.
Or you think we can't yet.
Yeah.
Or you think the world is unconstrained, meaning we can quantify consciousness. It's just a matter of time. And when we do, we make humanity ours. It's not natural. It might have come with the world, but we own it now. We own it.
Yeah.
And if you don't own it, that's synonymous with saying, like, it's like a belief in God.
Absolutely.
You believe there's something beyond our understanding of physics, of quantum physics, that no matter how far we take this bitch, we're never understanding everything that there is to know about this universe. And then if you were to break that down into like, well, how do we develop cultures and societies? If you think you're operating in obedience to something that was already here that you don't understand, that would make you, on paper, more conservative. Because there's certain things you can't fuck with. We can't make this the utopia because that we're dealing with nature here and we have to obey to some degree.
Too many goddamn people, too.
Too many people, yeah.
Too many different walks of life, man.
But if you think that we are not obligated to behave in accordance with any of this natural shit that we found here, that we can own, manipulate, and control it through science, ultimately, then you would believe in an unconstrained version of the world, that there is nothing all-powerful that we have to obey.
We eventually will be able to manipulate.
We eclipse all of it. We eclipse all of it. And at what point in there do we lose humanity? How do you define humanity? Right? And so this is why conservatives are religious, or they believe in God and a higher power and natural law, and people who are scientifically minded and progressive they believe that a utopia is achievable, which is why you can, for example, deconstruct the concept of gender, because they don't believe that the earth dictated to us what that is. They believe that it's all fundamentally socially constructed, so we can change all of it anyway.
At any time.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so this is the progressive versus a conservative, the God-fearing person versus the atheist. That's the biggest picture.
There's a lot of gray area in both of those things. That's fucking messy.
It is very messy. But you see how you can chase those back to like these
Totally.
people believe in a God or a higher power, and these people simply do not.
Yeah.
And it's the science versus religion, conservative, Democrat.
You know what's weird is that even within both of those ways of life, essentially, if you want to look at it like that, both are correct and incorrect.
Correct. Yeah, I'm with you.
The data doesn't support, disprove, or prove either side. You know what I mean? So we will forever be chasing this definitive end of understanding everything.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, give us, I don't even know, dude, 10,000, 20,000 more years. Like, we'll probably sift through a lot of shit.
A lot. A whole lot.
But it's crazy because we just keep finding more and more and more as our tech improves. We realize like, oh shit, there's a lot of small stuff out there that we cannot fucking see.
Correct.
It's weird because, well, let me ask you this. Do you think like religion is, there's no new to a religious story. It's all past. It's what happened, right? Okay. Science is very forward thinking. So it's breaking ground. It's discovering, exploring, it's experimenting essentially, where religion is like, you take it as it is or you leave it, right? There's no like new, you would think that with all the science and progression that we're making, they'd be like, hey, Jesus was like we already know he's a real dude, but like there's a lot of shit that science can help religion with.
I agree with that.
But there's like this definitive line, like we don't fuck with you.
Correct.
And you don't come over here and mess with our stuff because the public image would not, that just doesn't work, right? We don't mess with each other. Two completely different tribes.
Yeah.
And it's like, if we reach the end, would we even know it?
Well,
right?
I do think that, I think they support each other more than they'd like to admit. I think they make enemies of each other and they should not.
Yeah.
I think the problem is a lot of believers tend to not want to retreat into that metaphorical territory where they begin the argument by saying...
It's confusing.
Yes.
It deconstructs every single choice of their life, right?
Well, there is... Let me give you a weird example here. So I do believe that the past can be altered. But let me explain how. It's not a time travel sort of thing.
I was like,
so like, okay, so let's just say, sorry, I'm going to throw Taylor under the bus for a second. Let's just say that you get home and you find out that she had cheated on you while you were on this trip, right? All of a sudden, that lens that we've been talking about, how you perceive the world and how it actually changes reality, the lens that you had of her, which is that she loved you, she was loyal to you, that you had a future together, that all of those things, that's all shattered. And now you realize that you believed or you lived a lie over the last several years.
Sure.
That it wasn't actually this. I thought it was, but I was wrong.
Yeah.
So the past has been altered by the information in the present, right? And I think this is kind of what science does to religion in a weird way. It alters what we thought we knew. We used to think it was fundamentally this way, but no, it's actually that. It doesn't mean that something...
What was set in stone...
Correct.
Is now being rewritten.
Correct. And it doesn't invalidate that an objective thing happened, but how you perceive it does change the world around you. Your perception does change your entire experience. And so your perception can be shattered in a moment, and you have to reassess what it was that actually happened because you see it differently now. And I think this is what science does to religion. It doesn't disprove it in the sense that it invalidates all of it, period.
Sure.
I don't look at it that way at all. I think it's more of a clarity. You begin to see what we were actually doing.
Sure.
Right? And I think a great example would be like the Jesus God thing. It's not that we might have proven that did not happen, for example. I don't know.
Whatever.
I'm sure a dude named Jesus was killed on a cross, but I don't know.
Sure.
But
Jesus was like a really common name.
Yeah, it was a common name too. Yeah. And I'm sure a lot of people were crucified as well,
There were.
Yeah.
Any depiction of that scene, there's multiple crosses.
Sure.
With other people.
Well, there was always the three, right? People on either
exactly.
side of him. But it's more so that we're just understanding the truth that was that story in a very new way, where it's not that you and Taylor were never together. No, you totally were, and that did happen, but now you see it a little different, huh? And I think this is what science does to religion. It inflicts a uncomfortable perspective on what we were actually doing. It doesn't invalidate the story
Absolutely
either.
Not.
It still happened, but
because it can't prove or disprove what had happened, right?
Yeah.
And that's where they collide. Because it's like, okay, if you're going to go hard science, then with your data and everything that you have or that we have today, how can we not disprove a lot of these things? There's really, I mean, unless you're going and looking for it, there's not a ton of like on mainstream media, scientists and religious figures battling it back and forth, which
not
you would
mainstream,
think would be like the main thing
it's
that we
the most
would all
interesting
be talking
thing,
about,
yeah.
right? Like, how are we all here? What's our creation story?
Yeah.
Like, you would think all they would teach in school is like aeronautical space science and like aerospace stuff and just building and innovating and all these things, but all we do is just talk about the past and essentially kind of like push them along, right? And so it's this weird battle that isn't really on the forefront. It's this super important thing. It's not even a battle, I guess.
It's in the background of culture.
People. Totally, man.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like a one or the other thing. Very, very few people. I actually used to work for a guy, one of the smartest dudes I knew. And then he told me that there's nothing wrong with this, but he was like super hardcore Christian. Went from like bona fide atheist, hated the religious world, was raised as a Catholic, went out of it. Pretty common story, right?
Sure.
Where you kind of like discover who you are, whatever. Married his wife, and then now it's the most interesting conversation because he has the atheist knowledge. All of the things you would say to a Christian to
Powerful
go like, no,
debater.
like this is what happened. Like that's bogus because this, and this.
Yeah.
But then he has like this weird, I don't even know. It's like this data entry thing of like things that combat his own thoughts with like religion and whatnot. So you would think like very few people, do you know any scientific people that are like heavily religious?
Oh, they exist. That's
totally. This guy was one of them.
For sure.
But it's very, very rare to have both of those things combined.
Yes.
And then still choose one.
Well,
right?
But I don't think that it has to be a choice necessarily, because this was something that I grossly misunderstood about the concept of faith. I've revisited this in the last year, that faith does not supplement science. Where you say, well, I don't need the science because I got faith that this happened. It's more so when science hits a dead end, which it does. It cannot answer. You
just gotta believe.
Especially when you get into morality in itself. Like, sorry, science tells you what is, not what ought to be.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
And so when you hit those dead ends, which science is full of them, that is when religious ideology fills in the gaps. Because there are, in fact, things that science can't even touch.
Totally.
Right? And so it's more like science takes you as far as it can go, and you're aware of that. But then all of the remaining questions is where somebody would exercise faith.
Totally.
And that's how they coexist. It's not like 1 and 0 necessarily. If science is 1, well, we expand that all the way. And then we still got this giant fucking gap of understanding. And religion sort of enters on the back end. So to me, like the only people whose religious ideology like I really respect are those who also take into account all of the science that they possibly can at the same time, right? Like, to be religious and not scientific, to me, that's a great definition of ignorance. You know, it's placing faith where you don't even have to. Like, we have answers to some of this shit. If you want them, you don't need to be faithful for the entirety of your belief system.
Yeah.
But I do understand why faith has its role at the end of scientific understanding.
Because that's where it's just all dark. You don't no one can tie the knot for you to make it nice and neat like humans like it, so we can continue our face value existence, essentially. That sounds really dark, but it's like face value meaning what's literally in front of your face. Because if we were to constantly think about the creation story, why we're here, Big Bang Theory versus the creation story for Christianity or Catholicism or whatever it is, there's so many different thoughts and ways to think about these things that we would once again go mad. And I don't know, it's this balance of going to sleep at night, just understanding that we don't know is all it is. Because thinking of if you are a scientific Catholic or whatever, just for example, like to reach this point where you're like, okay, this is where science stops and there's like no understanding, like no definitive understanding. I need to supplement that gap with something that makes me feel better. That's where it becomes dangerous for me. Where you see what I mean? Like, you're kind of like, it becomes a definitive because deep down we want to have things in order, and we want to have things like, no, I somewhat understand that gap.
Well,
when even the science itself is fucking hard to understand.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Comfort with the question mark is definitely a thing you wrestle with, right? Like,
Sure.
what do you do about the fact that you're smart enough to ask questions that you're not smart enough to answer?
Yep.
That was Albert Camus' absurdism.
Yep.
Was that life is fucking absurd in that way? And I do think what you're saying is people insert religion there because they're so deeply uncomfortable with not knowing.
Sure.
But I think even if you consciously rejected that, you will end up operating in the same way. You'll just unconsciously believe something else.
Because it doesn't, just because you believe it doesn't mean it actually changes something.
Yeah.
Depending on your motives, right? So if you start taking action in pushing a certain agenda or whatever, then inevitably something would manifest from that, whether it's religious or scientific.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's just this, I feel like it's a deep human condition to just put something to rest. Because existence is hard.
Yeah.
It like takes a lot of bandwidth to get up every day to even like do normal things like drive to the store and go grocery shopping. That is so incredibly stimulating to your brain on like a neurological level. All the colors, the lights, even just being in the studio, all these lights pointing at you. Like after a while, your brain's like, too much, please stop, right?
Yeah.
You become burnt out on that. If you're constantly thinking about these massive ideas, we'd never leave the fucking house. Like we really
Dude,
wouldn't.
welcome to my whole fucking life.
Exactly. That's it, man.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Like, you could literally think about these things forever. And I'm always curious, like, will science, even if we have the answer, will there I'm sure just because there's too many people in the world, but there will always be someone to say like, that's not right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, okay. So let me ask you another roundabout way to kind of approach this. Like, so in the concept of belief, like what do you believe about the world? You can state a belief, but would you agree that how you act is probably a better representation of what you really believe? You might consciously say, I look at it this way, and this is what I believe about the world. But if you act a different way, it seems like that's what you would really believe, right? Like how you act determines what you truly believe, whether or not that's even conscious to you, right?
That's dependent on, I feel like, your self-confidence. Because sometimes you would project something that you don't actually believe based off of the fear of what others are going to, how they're going to accept that.
That's
and
true.
how you're going to mirror yourself or whatever it is in the individuals that are around you. It's so skewed.
Well, so maybe a concrete example would help. Like you have a young kid and he's acting out, a 12-year-old boy, and he's getting in trouble and he's doing stuff. And you say, what do you believe about yourself? And he says, I'm fucking awesome. You know, like you say that, and that might be what the story that's in your head. That's the monologue in your head all day, every day. I'm the shit. I'm awesome.
Yeah.
But underneath that, like as adults, we know what's there.
Yeah.
Right? You hate yourself.
I'm the worst.
Yeah, you're the fucking worst. And you know that. And you act.
And you know that.
And you act because that's how you act. That's how you act.
For sure.
Right? You act like you suck because you believe that somewhere.
Yeah.
And bringing that into your consciousness can take years to understand that. But I think when we're talking about this, like, where does religion enter and what does it actually do for people? I think if you tried your hardest to live according to science, let's just say, and eliminate all religious thinking, all faith-based ideology from your consciousness, that you will, to some degree, still act as though parts of that are true, right? Like you will act as though you adopt some religion. You might adjust the rules a little bit.
You have some sort of like not chemical makeup, but some sort of structure that you're trying to kind of project.
You'll adopt a tradition of your own.
Framework of some kind.
Correct.
Yes.
And so it's almost like you can't escape the religious structure. You might swap all the names and all the metaphors and all the iconography and all the dates and the stories. You'll swap all that out, but you will swap it out for another very close version to religion, right? Because like this is how all humans close that gap. Like, yes, science dictates a ton of what we know and understand and how we live. But like when you're closing that gap at the end, people say, I don't want to be religious. Like you just made up your own is what you ended up doing, right?
Everyone has to have some sort of comfort at the end of the day. Whatever vision they have to make them feel that way, whether it's through religion or the many different types of religions and just like feeling, I don't know, a sense of completion. Right?
Sure.
It's that, like we were talking about earlier, the fear of the unknown. And like, that's tough to live in that every single day.
You'll just die there.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Like you can't do that. You have to have some sort of like, okay, This is it.
Yeah.
Like I'm on the right track, even if it lasts for a day.
Yeah.
That'll give you like another, week of feeling sane, and then you go back into it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That would be such a torturous life to constantly, which I mean, we all live essentially tortured lives because we're depends on how open you are and how much you want to tap into these things too. You know what I mean? It's tough, dude, to ride that line of asking these questions but not being able to answer them. It's very, very tough. Even the smartest people in the world, some of like the most like prominent physicists of our time are religious.
Yeah.
Which is crazy because these people, you're a fan of Always Sunny, right? So there's the episode where they're trying to disprove evolution, right? And
I love that.
Yes,
Mac,
and so
his
this
point.
stupid science bitch,
Yeah.
right? And so he's talking about like, he's talking about like, talking to Dennis about, so you've poured through the data, you've read all the pages, because Dennis is like, but you're basing off of your whole existence off of some stories that some guy wrote that you've never even read every single page. And then Mac's like, okay, well, you're doing the same through science. Like I personally will admit, I've never really looked at all of the data, nor would I be able to understand all the deep math and the years, decades of testing and all these things, right? And so even in science, you have faith.
Correct.
And so it's this weird gray area that both sides have kind of interrelated. And no matter which side you're on, you're going to fall into that gray area of course, this is faith in data or this is faith in the stories and the feeling essentially that I get, right?
You live your life according to things that you are not capable of verifying, and you never will.
That's it.
You're not even trying to verify it.
That's it.
Unless are you a physicist?
We're sitting here having this definitive conversation like we're fucking like we know
anything.
We're fucking idiots. Like we
morons.
really are.
Yeah.
We are absolute morons.
Yeah.
And it's just fun to talk about and it's fun to challenge.
Yeah.
Right? Because it just, even if you have this conversation, it opens up doors. Yeah. It really does. Even though I hate having not that I'm saying I hate this conversation, which I do.
I'm miserable.
But this blows. I can't wait to leave. But it seriously unlocks a lot of I haven't really thought about that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Essentially, even if it's just someone, I don't know, if you combat someone on their chemical makeup, their morality, like essentially the way they design their lives, they're really quick to push you away. Right.
Sure.
And it's just kind of weird how these conversations turn certain people like us on. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're like, oh, cool. Let's challenge my way of thinking or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then the other side of it, even though we both involve faith, one shuts down. There are scientists that shut down as well. I'm not saying most religious people shut down.
Sure. Well, no,
it sounds horrible.
Most of them do. A ton of them do. It sucks. Yeah.
Because with that type of thinking, I think it's easier to just go like, okay, cool. They got it figured out. Let's focus on raising a family and getting a good job and these things.
It's certainly easier to think that everything has already been answered. God damn, life would be so easy if
oh my God.
If the Bible is fundamentally true, start to finish, you done, bro. Read this bitch and you're good. How easy is that?
Imagine. Well, you can because I've never been religious ever.
Yeah,
ever,
I lived that way for a decade.
And I wish I woke up and felt like my life was in somebody else's hands. That would be fucking awesome. Because I'd be like, you got me, dude. I don't know what I'm doing today. Just unfold it for me. But man, the pressure, believe me, if I had a choice, I would be religious.
Yeah. Seriously.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Even though my personality, everything questions and challenges, all that stuff, and has since I've been a kid. I would trade it all. Yeah. Just to believe.
Yeah.
I would, dude. I would.
I hear you.
Yeah.
All right. I want to go back to one thing that you said.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you were talking about the inability to verify sort of things. And I think that the Always Sunny example is perfect. Bitch, you can't verify anything on either side. You're not checking the books on either side.
So you're pouring through the data.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, go
the
fuck
files,
yourself.
The books.
The numbers. The data.
None of it. But this was something I actually learned from just observing the flat earth community, who, for the record, I don't think the earth is fucking flat. And I just don't. But I found it interesting that at least tens of thousands of people could be convinced of that. What the fuck is going on? Is there some sketchy data that is kind of
where
weird?
is this?
Where's this coming from?
Totally, yeah.
And what I found in just a few nights of going down that wormhole, trying to understand why these people came to this conclusion. They're now certain that the Earth is flat, not just skeptical. They're certain, right?
Oh, this is a way of life.
It is a way of life. This is
how we
right?
live our lives now.
Yeah. But what I realized is that they are operating on this idea that we can verify nothing, and that is true. Because if I told you right now that there's 220 trillion gallons of water in the ocean, like, you don't fucking know if that's true. You have no idea. You don't even.
That's an educated guess.
Yeah.
Based off of like volume.
Well, and based off of tools that you've never seen, even if we had the tool that measures.
Oh, you're talking about how we get the data?
How we got the data.
We don't know how correct that is?
Correct.
Yes.
If I put you in the control room for the rocket that goes to outer space, you probably can't name 5 buttons in what they do. Like, this is so unbelievably, dramatically out of your scope of understanding that the amount of faith required to say that we have any concept of how many gallons of water in the ocean, that's astounding, the amount of faith that you have to have in that, right? And so when we begin stacking these beliefs, I lose myself in a lot of conversations about outer space.
Yes.
Because the fucking magnetosphere. Like, all right, dope, what is that? Well, it's based on the particles, and it's the sun and the solar flare, and then the, like, all right, well, what is that? Like, oh, well, there we don't know. I'm like, well, I don't know any of this shit. I've never seen the tool that measures one of these factors, and we're compounding these beliefs on top of each other. And so when we talk about, like, proving that the Earth is round, well, within 10 seconds into that debate, you're going to name 3 or 4 facts about the world that I cannot verify.
Totally.
And all of a sudden, I'm stepping into this territory of faith very quickly.
You're like, shit, I am on a side that I don't fully believe in.
Correct.
Because I don't definitively know.
I can't possibly do it. And the reason this is frustrating to me is because the career path that we both chose, being professional drummers, rhythm isn't like that. Because no matter how complex the piece of music, whatever the question is that someone has about a dynamic, a pattern, a texture, a rhythm, a note spacing, a subdivision, any of that, I am able, because of math, to go into the details as far as possible. I can abstract, go all the way in and go, here's exactly what's happening. I know that this is this way because of all this stuff.
Many other things.
I have to have zero faith in my understanding of rhythm. None is required because it's mathematical ultimately, until you get into human touch and things like that. But when we get into these more complex fields that involve all of these wild sciences, I understand where the flat earthers are coming from, in that, like, you got to have some faith to think that the Earth is round. At the very least, trusting upon the scientific data from a body of people that you don't know, that you've never met. And even if they were right in front of you and explained it to you, you're too dumb to understand what they're talking about, right? Yeah. It's sort of like, I get it. I get the skepticism.
Yeah, we are surrounded by answers that we don't understand.
Correct.
Like, every fucking day. Like, the answers are there, right? And you're absolutely right. There are, no matter what the debate is, both sides, there's a point where you don't know, no matter what it is, right? Yep. And so it's this, to push any sort of agenda or belief or anything. This is where I've been since I was a kid, where I'm like, listen, I'm not one or the other. I'm not saying there is no God, there is no this, there's science is the way or science is not the way, whatever. I'm a part of the party that we just don't know, dude. We don't understand. Yeah. And at least right now, definitively, I can say that because I'm the one experiencing this and I don't know.
Yeah.
I have no idea for you, right?
Yeah.
And so it's this weird argument. It's this pointless argument. It's really fun to talk about. It's really fun to think about these things, and it's important. But it's like, man, our understanding only goes so far.
Yeah.
And we hit it pretty quick.
Yeah.
Because of how accessible information is now. And you can literally YouTube the whole flat earth concept and be caught up to speed in 15 minutes. Yeah. It's crazy. It's so crazy. Man. Yeah. It's the overwhelming amount of information, ironically, that makes everything so confusing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? It's we have all of the data, but fucking good luck pouring through it and understanding that stuff. Good luck. Right? It's so crazy, man.
I think one area where I do think it is appropriate to have faith, for example, like we're talking about like tech and science that we don't understand, which is basically all of it because we're dummies, but like I know this microphone works. I'd be lying if I said I knew exactly how it works. Sure. I know a lot about it, but like, I can use it and I can trust it. Same with your phone. I don't know how the fuck this thing works, but I'm on Instagram.
We live our lives.
Yeah,
exactly.
My life depends on it in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like faith makes sense because you can touch it. You know, faith is justified in this technology because I can live it and I can touch it in a certain way. And you can expand that to like certain philosophical beliefs. Like you might not have any evidence that your life is worth anything, but when you act like it is worth something, you know how that makes you feel.
For sure.
So you can like exercise faith in certain areas and say, well, how does it feel if I test it out? Like, oh, it actually works pretty well,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
And so that's one of the like existential pieces of evidence for acting according to faith in some ways. If you try it on and you're like, well, how does it feel to just pretend that that's real for a second? Let me go live it and see what that's like if I believe I'm worth something. If I act like there was a God, for example, and you go, oh, wait a minute, this actually has an impact on life. That's the closest you'll get to like evidence for that sort of thing. It's like, how do you know science works? It's because I hold my fucking phone and it works.
It turns on.
Yeah.
I send you a message and you send me one back.
Yeah.
It's crazy, yeah.
But you talk to a nihilist, people that say there's no value. It's just about in anything, right? Well, go try that on and walk around the world and come back. How'd that work?
That feels pretty cool. Seriously.
Well, indulgence feels cool. Yeah.
Indulgence for sure.
I think it's temporary, though.
Alleviating the pressure of what matters and what doesn't matter, just letting that go for a little bit is really, to me, is cool. Honestly, it's the way that like you can drown in trying to figure out the weight of something in your life, essentially how much something affects you, how much of your life you let that thing consume, your mental makeup, right? And so especially with like nihilism, you're essentially able to turn a lot of that shit off, and it's very freeing. Not that I'm a nihilist, but I'm just saying, like, as an observer of the world we live in, I would imagine just as freeing and comforting as being like super religious is, that has to be almost the exact same on the opposite side of the spectrum, where you've let go of everything and you're just like, I don't give a fuck.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
In a more aggressive tone, don't get me wrong. Like nihilism is like, fuck, like we're going in, right? None of this matters.
I think the one distinction between those two would be that nihilism is void of meaning. Like it's admittedly void of meaning.
Yeah.
Where religion claims that we know the meaning. We've identified it and nailed it down.
Yeah. When with nihilism, there is no center. It's all pointless.
Is it like what you're saying, that the commonality between a nihilist and a Christian would be that they solved something? They claimed an answer.
They're at peace.
Yes. Okay.
I think is what it is. Like where it's like, I have, on the religious side, I have enough to let me sleep at night and think about other things. And then on the nihilist path, it's like, none of it matters. So I can enjoy and be open to a lot of things, right? And so at both sides of the extreme spectrum there, there's levels of peace and comfort where it's like, this is cool. Yeah. I'm okay with this.
I think the problem you would run into is what that produces when you run the experiment over someone's life the whole time.
Sure.
Right? Like, do you produce happiness, contentment, satisfaction? Like which one produces which? Like, I think unfortunately the answer is that nihilism doesn't really produce that stuff. It produces like indulgent experience necessarily. Yes. Yeah. And I feel like it fosters some resentment, bitterness towards the world, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's at the root of all that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Which can, at least on an individual level, is poisonous, man. Like I wouldn't want, if you told me that you were religious or if you were a nihilist, I would be more happy if you said you were religious. I'm like, well, he's wrong, but at least he's like probably happy. But if you were like, I'm a nihilist, nothing means anything. I'm like, bro, I'm a little concerned, dude.
Yeah,
that's you're going to manifest some
fearful. Yeah, you become like concerned with that person for sure, because we know that like. Well, we don't know shit. That's the whole point of this.
That's the name of this episode.
But yeah, we don't know shit with Devin Sumner. It's, I don't know, man. It's like this weird level of when you cut it off. Meaning like with religion, I was raised Catholic. I was raised Baptist, right? And so
they go hard.
They go super hard, dude. I wouldn't know because I was in the parking lot playing basketball the whole goddamn time while mom and dad brought their Bibles every week. Never practiced it outside of church. It was just
Sunday
really
Christians,
interesting. But there was something that happened. And I'm not saying there's a definitive moment, but like something sways you another way, right?
Sure.
And no matter what it is, like it's that old saying of he who says he can do something and can't do something is right.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you're saying like you're trash, then you're going to be trash. Mm-hmm. If you're going to be a successful person and you're basically doing what is that? Not manifestation, but the affirmations. When you're like, I'm strong, I am good looking, I'm rich, money is attracted to me, like that kind of stuff, right? You will eventually make something like that happen, whatever these affirmations you are telling yourself daily. And so it's like on both sides of the spectrum, you're right. Which is weird because it's whatever you think it is. Like the world is too vast. We are like, back to the beginning of this podcast, we're not that fucking important. Like we're not. It's just, well, to me, of course, we don't know. But it's like, it just doesn't seem like we're that significant where this entire existence would be wrapped around us. Right? As like the religious story and Jesus dying for us and relinquishing all of our sins. And like, it's very like the world is for you, where it's like to me, at least walking outside, it's not the case.
So let me say that a different way, like that it would be ignorant or selfish to believe the world is for you. But
it seems silly.
Is the world for consciousness, human consciousness? Because in the absence of human consciousness and human experience, what is there?
That goes back to the memory bank. If we had no memory, it would just be what's in front of you at that very moment, right? Yeah. And so like consciousness itself lives in a memory. It's what you've experienced, and that's like it's that constant state of reflection.
Well,
right?
Does it live in a memory? Is certainly a big function of our consciousness for sure. Like I said, you can't operate a day if you don't remember what a car is. You can't drive it, right?
Yeah.
But when you take psychedelics, for example, or when you dream and your memories are in fact wiped, we're tossing your consciousness.
We're throwing it out.
We're throwing that bitch somewhere else. We don't know where you're going, if you're going anywhere, if you believe in realms or any type of, dimensional travel, like whatever theories people have about it. It sure seems like we can wipe away your memory, but the experience remains.
Sure.
Like memory is definitely
DNA.
Memory is a super important fixture of being conscious as we think about it now. It's the only way we build things, again, get through a day. But I do think you could wipe that away, and there's something about consciousness that still remains there. I just know what it's like to forget my name on mushrooms. Oh. And to still be not here, but my consciousness it's not black. I'm still experiencing something, and whatever that is, your consciousness, your ability to experience the world, if that goes away and it doesn't exist anywhere, nothing is conscious, what exactly is left over in the absence of the ability to experience it, right? Like, is there... This is why I push back on the idea that it's all about us, or that it's selfish to think that we're of any significance at all on this planet. My argument would be that there is something supremely unique about consciousness in that it validates reality. In the absence of it, well, there might not be anything else here. Like, what matters in the absence of consciousness? So in a selfish way, it's a selfish way to say this, but it might be all about us. It might be all about consciousness.
Sure.
Not to say that we're the only conscious beings in the universe. There might very well be other consciousnesses out there that we don't know about. But in the absence of our consciousness, I fail to see what matters at all.
Sure.
Right? So it's sort of like, well, our consciousness is the fixture that makes it worth anything.
Sure.
Right?
That's what gives it its value. Because if you weren't conscious about your situation, your love language, your financial situation, where you live, who you are, like your chemical makeup, all that stuff, there wouldn't be much left as far as we know, right? Because we don't know life without consciousness, so we would not be able to know what it's like.
There's no experience to be had.
I would imagine it would be very drony, right? As far as like you're just a fucking android walking through the world.
But you can't imagine either. There's no one to imagine.
Try to think of that. It gets like real squirrely in here really quick, right?
Well, you can't have any thoughts about it because there are no thoughts to be had about it.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, is it...
Who's in the driver's seat at that point?
And so that's the
crazy.
thing. So if you remove consciousness from this whole equation and you deem this whole thing invalid and not worth having, there's no experience to be had, so who cares? It's just nothing means anything clearly now. Then... isn't some part of human consciousness, isn't it actually all about us?
At that standpoint, I would imagine so.
It's a level of abstraction. You don't always have to take it there necessarily. But like, I don't know. I think there's an argument to be had that it is all about consciousness.
Yeah. That's a very good point. And it
sounds selfish. It's a weird thing to say.
I hear you though. No, that's a very good point. And I haven't really thought about that. I think when you start to attach meaning to why we're here and why this place was created for us and for us thought, that's where it gets kind of like misconstrued a little bit. Sure. Consciousness itself is probably the foundation of reality, essentially, because you need to be able to perceive the reality in front of you. This is like what you're experiencing, right? If you have no memory bank or no filter to have some sort of thought, which is consciousness, after you experience something, you're going into a blank slate.
Yeah.
Right? It's just constantly just like this blank palette every day.
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, I mean, we probably do know we wouldn't be where we are without that. Because there would be no innovation. There would be no drive. Yeah, we would be repeating tons of the same mistakes over and over and over again. Obviously we have no idea, but
you can't build anything.
Totally. Yeah. Because you would never be able to improve because you would have no recollection of doing it wrong.
Memento shit.
Yeah. That's weird, man. Yeah, that gets really gray really fast.
Yeah.
If you start thinking about consciousness and how that plays into our chemical makeup, what the way we shape our lives, what we think of as like who you are as a person, who you want to become, the room left to grow into that person that you'd like to become. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
All that shit gets thrown out.
I feel like what we run into here every time is it's not like stated clearly enough sometimes, but like how confusing consciousness is like completely indescribable. Like it is such a goddamn mystery that science isn't even kind of sort of a little bit close to understanding what that is. Yeah. We're not even kind of sort of at the edge.
That's the one thing that makes us different from all these other species as far as we know. Yeah. Because like all the animals could totally be communicating with each other.
They could.
No fucking clue.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've definitely discovered like dolphins have their own
languages,
frequency languages and things. Yeah.
But it's like I don't know, man, because you see it in like certain primates and whatnot of developing tools. Yeah. Learning, remembering not to go someplace, remembering, this is where a year later when it rains and it's the summer season, we go here. It's crazy. Yeah. So there is some level of activity going on up there, right? Yes. But it's like,
and we share things with them, like neurological function and like a lot of other animals.
DNA makeup.
Correct. But whatever that differentiating factor is that we call consciousness, what makes a human being, the ability to question our mortality, the ability to barter with the future, like you get into these philosophical things that set us apart.
Sure.
We don't know what that is or why we do that necessarily, because we can look at the brain activity of other animals and say, well, they have a lot of the same shit inside of them, yet we don't deem them to be conscious or sentient in the way that we are.
Yeah.
And explaining what consciousness is, why we have it, it's deeply like troubling to me that science can't touch that yet. Yeah. Like we aren't even on the edge of kind of sort of having a loose explanation. Like all the philosophers, all the scientists, all the engineers, all the neuroscientists, put them all in a room, and the collective answer is we have no fucking idea what consciousness is at all. And to me, that is more evidence of the divinity, the mystical, there's some shit you're not even close to out here, which lends you into a little bit more religious thinking, but it doesn't mean you have to adopt an ideology necessarily. It's more so conceding that there is a fuck ton more here than we're even kind of able to understand. So the whole
sure, man. This is where you trickle in that religious gap to fill that man, this is fucked up to think about. So let's just fill that with Poseidon rules the seas. Or whatever. You know what I mean?
But I mean, it is possible to say that's the best answer we have. Doesn't mean it's fundamentally true.
Sure.
But like science can't fill those gaps.
Not where we are in our current research. That's for damn sure. As far as we know, right?
And it won't be in our lifetime. So it's like, well, how do you want to live from here till the time you die, right? Like, because science ain't filling that gap. Not the moral gap. Not the if you really wanted to understand what it is to be conscious and a human. Science isn't going to answer that in our lifetime, unfortunately. Yeah. It informs it quite a bit.
That's why after a while, you just say, fuck it. You know what I mean, though? Seriously, like You will literally, like we've said multiple times, you will go insane trying to find these answers.
Yeah.
Literally insane, where you will miss out on so many things in life trying to figure out the whys. Right. And I respect the people that are like diligently working at this very second trying to figure out what human consciousness is. You know what I mean? Or whatever the next endeavor is.
Yeah.
But man, for me, it just becomes like not even a time suck, because these things are very valid and it's good to research these things.
Sure.
But I realize, like, in a weird way, seeking for that answer takes away from that end result that we were talking about, getting the answer, takes away that whole journey in between.
Yeah, you could waste the journey chasing something you chasing a dragon.
Totally.
It's just,
it's this weird thing. I don't know, man. We'll maybe find the answer in our lifetime, but who the fuck knows? I feel like our lives are very, very, well, they are retrospectively very short.
Very.
And like
we're like a third of the way into this bitch.
Yes.
Weird, isn't it?
Yeah. No.
Shit.
If we even live till we're fucking 90, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
probably not 90.
Dude.
And too many drugs to live to 90.
Crazy. Like, my dad died at 39.
Wow.
That's 7 years from now. And I think about that shit.
Wow.
Where I'm like, fuck, who cares who's right? I have 7 years to live. That's not real, I hope. But like,
it's a
if
potential.
it were to happen, it can happen that fast.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you don't know how much time you have left. So it's this weird balancing of like, fuck, I want to know these answers. I really want to like really dive into religion and understand that and go through all these things.
Or
but
any
it's
version
like,
of philosophy, just, understanding the world.
anything like that. Yeah, just putting religion on it as like a blanket term. But it's like, you miss out on so much trying to find these answers out, right? And so it's like your time is limited. That potential we were talking about is limited. If you're constantly thinking about these things, this is a personal thing for me, because there are certain people that thrive off of this shit. It's their version of drumming.
I'm one of them. Yeah.
Totally. Exactly.
But I know what you're saying. Yeah.
Totally. So like, for me, I have to put it to rest to actually live my life. Like it's bad, because I'm an analytical person, and I would just and I know you are as well, and you're constantly trying to figure out that puzzle. Now, I wish I could lay it to rest permanently, but I can't.
You got to reopen it every once in a while.
Totally,
take a look.
Like this right now. Where it's like, all right, this conversation,
open,
but like, let's pull it all out. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I buried this for so long, because it's like, you just realize the deeper you go, the more you don't know.
Yeah, you know nothing.
You know what I mean? And certain personalities like yourself, you can take that. Right?
Or thrive
You're
in
just
it.
That's what I'm saying. You're just like,
yeah.
oh shit, okay, cool. Like this is more stuff I need to understand, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing of like laying it to rest so you can progress in your life.
I see,
you know
what
I
you
mean?
mean.
Even though that is a level of progression to find those answers. It's just strange, man, the many pathways you could take.
And it's at this moment we're breaking out the Gorilla Glue, because how did we do that whole conversation without smoking weed?
It's because we're lifted.
I've been praying, bro.
You've been praying?
I'm just kidding.
We all know that. Don't worry.
No, I think you were talking about like the reason that you don't go down these wormholes super often, because it's sort of like there's discomfort when you realize like, oh, I don't know shit. Like, and here I am trying to figure it out, and that battle is sort of frustrating, and it definitely is. But for me, I look at it as like when you explore a new philosophy or belief about the world, it is definitely painful. It's like painful in the way that growing is painful. You're like, I don't like this. I'm not good at that. Yeah. But if you can find something valid or true in these explorations, like we've done today, if you find something that clicks, like, that makes a lot of sense. Actually, I can see the world that way now. Even just the slight variation in your belief, that it's like acquiring a new set of glasses for the world, right? Mm-hmm. This is how I try to tell Kelly of like why I'm so interested in philosophy. It's like being able to see new depths of reality. I don't see it crystal clear.
It's like layers.
It's like layers.
Right?
And imagine how a 13-year-old walks around looking at the world. They got a really shitty set of glasses because they don't understand all these layers that you and I might walk into a situation and we're with a 13-year-old kid and we both pick up on social clues from this person we're talking to, where we sense sketchiness, we sense manipulation, we sense there's weird vibe with this guy.
Yeah, totally.
And the 13-year-old, we leave the room and they're like, he was nice. And I'm like, that was not a nice man.
That guy's a murderer.
That guy's a murderer. We could see, and they would say, well, why?
No, he stole something on the way out.
And it's because we can see things that they cannot.
Sure.
There's layers to reality, social perceptions, different things that we
experiences and being taken advantage of, and like being alert through that behavior when it happens again, for sure. Where you're like, this reminds me of whatever these other situations are that have fucked you over, right?
Exactly. And in that way, you are more mature, more experienced, more capable than a 13-year-old. You see things clearer than they do.
Sure.
And whenever I explore philosophy, my goal is to extract something about this that helps me see the world in a more clear way. And that's the value of going down these wormholes. Because you're right, the ultimate conclusion is you don't know anything. But I can certainly discover like little chunks of truth inside of discussions like this, especially when we're both like pushing to the boundaries of what we actually know. You kind of push, you're like,
start talking out of our ass a little bit.
We're too dumb. Let me pull back a little. Like, I kind of know what I'm talking. I'm a fucking idiot. Yeah, when you like push those boundaries, you end up grabbing things from those conversations, even though it's like uncomfortable and like you just reminding yourself what a fucking moron you are.
Yeah, it's
still nice to come back and be like, wow, well, I there was some validity here and some validity here, and then go try that out in the world.
Oh,
right?
Yeah,
to me, it's sort of
you
like
have a new filter to try.
A new filter, new set of glasses I can throw on. And so certain philosophies have given me these different sets of glasses where I feel like I can see things that some people don't see.
Sure.
Right? Where it's just like, oh, you haven't tried this bitch on. You didn't go down that road yet, but you go all the way down there and you'll be like, oh shit.
Yeah, I get it now.
I get it. I get it. Yeah.
It's really interesting because some of that is like self-inflicted, where you put yourself in these situations and it makes you push and learn, right? And then if you're aware enough things, you remember that the next time, and then you grow from that, right?
Yeah.
But do you have any friends that are like very sheltered, that have not lived life at all, but are like super street smart? That have these like inhibitions about people and like who to trust, and like they understand, like, I know you're pretty psychological, like you can, when you're talking to somebody, at least for me, like my experience in sales and just my interest
high
in
social
people
skills,
and whatnot,
you can pivot and turn around.
Yes, but it's also like the way you're standing, where are your arms, what do you do with your eyes, how long do you look at me directly in my eyes before you look away and you become uncomfortable?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like these little, like weird little things. And it's so interesting that our world can create the same person through two different pathways, where it's like you and I have experienced a lot of life. You've experienced the thievery, the whatever it is that makes you not trust that murderer kid, as opposed to the 13-year-old going, that guy's not so bad. But then you have buddies that are literally like, they don't step out of their fucking house.
Yeah.
But they can spot this shit from a mile away.
Yeah.
It's like this innate ability to, I don't know, sniff it out, man. It's like this primal thing. It's like, is experience necessary?
Yeah. Well, experience,
or is it like a chemical makeup kind of thing? You know what I mean?
Experience that you haven't articulated is still experience. So their inability to have the conversation about it doesn't necessarily invalidate that they have the same wisdom you do. They just didn't talk their way to it necessarily, right? Where, you know, guys like you and I that have we're talkers, right? Like we've always done this for 10 years. We always just fucking go down wormholes and shit together.
Mics or not.
Yeah. But there's people who don't do it that way, but they do have an ability to like retain information from their experiences, right?
Or someone else's experiences.
Yeah, that too.
Where like I learned from you, you learned from me, whatever it is, you know, not specifically. It's just like anything that you're watching, you don't actually, once again, kind of like us as human beings having the ability to project yourself in the future and experience something without actually doing that. You can learn from someone else's experiences now.
If you're smart enough. Yeah.
If you're smart, and like, it's this weird skill of being able to feel it without it happening to you.
Yeah.
Because you know about it. We watch documentaries. We know all the horrible shit that's going on in the world. But does that actually make us change chemically, as opposed to that fear being right on your front doorstep with like a gun in your face? Like that fucking changes you, like neurologically, chemically, like you become a different person, right?
Yeah.
And so it's this weird like insider outsider thing of like, I don't actually need to experience these things anymore to learn it. Right?
Yeah.
It's weird.
Yeah.
It's if you're that aware of who you are. It takes a lot of special skills, if you will.
Sure,
right?
sure.
You have to be super aware and extremely open and like
Yeah.
playing both sides. You not opinionated. You have to be an observer. Like it's this weird recipe.
Yeah. And dude, that's probably the recipe thing I've talked about in the music industry a lot recently, that people talk about. I don't know, any skill set you have, like what makes musical identity is so similar to what makes normal identity. It's you're a crazy complicated recipe. You're in a recipe with fucking 40,000 ingredients, and that might be way short of how many ingredients there really are.
Totally.
And just like a recipe with cooking, it's not just what the ingredients are, it's the timing, the order, the temperature, the environment,
So many
the preparation.
things. Yeah.
Yeah. You're this insanely complex recipe that's being built and constructed as you're going.
That's it, man.
Yeah.
And the recipe changes as you keep cooking yourself.
Correct,
Basically, right?
correct.
It's just the weirdest thing, man.
Yeah. And you can look back and see where you fucked the recipe up. Like, shit, I burned it.
Sometimes.
I burned the crust,
Sometimes.
bro.
Yeah, man. Until somebody comes by and they're like, "You're burnt." And you're like, "Am I?"
Yeah. Am I? Shit, I'm crispy out here, dude. I had no idea.
Up, man. What am I doing? Man, it's so deep. I wonder, just to kind of like sum it all up, I wonder if we'll ever reach this understanding that we've been talking about, whether it's through religion or experience or projecting yourself into time and experiencing these things without experiencing them. Like, will that ever be valid? You know what I mean? It's just, it's crazy.
I don't have a fucking answer. The way I move through the world is that you should find comfort, not in the fact that you'll never know. That's not comfortable. Not in the fact that you think you know, because you're probably wrong. But the comfort is in the battle. The push and the pull is where you're supposed to be.
Sure.
You're supposed to be navigating, balancing, and mediating chaos and order at the same time. Chaos is what you don't know. Order is what you do know. And there's a lot of manifestations and archetypes of chaos and order.
The push and pull between those things.
But ultimately, it's the push and the pull. You're supposed to, you say, which direction should our country go? Should we go far left or should we go far right?
Sure.
Neither, bitch. Down the middle. We're supposed to fight it out. And every one of these extreme ideologies is supposed to meet in the middle. That balance, the push and pull, is down to a fucking ionic level of positive and negative. Like our entire reality seems to be structured on the push and the pull, the balance. And you can label it as good and evil and chaos and order and male and female, testosterone and estrogen. You can find examples of that spectrum everywhere.
Sure.
But ultimately, it's right down the fucking middle. The comfort is in the fight, not in who wins,
Totally.
Yeah.
Because even if you won, you're just looking for the next battle.
Yeah, exactly. We'll just go find a battle.
That's it. That obviously wasn't hard enough, so let's fucking do this next one.
Exactly.
That's the theme, man.
Yep. Hell yeah.
The theme.
Well, to the fucking battle, brother.
My man.
Hell yeah. This is a good
Thanks
one,
for
dude.
having me, brother, for real.
Hell yeah,
It's been
man.
a fun time.
All right. Catch y'all later.
See ya.